you're doing sex wrong. You're taking advice from the wrong people, you don't understand female anatomy, and you're almost certainly abusing your body and making all of your deepest insecurities worse. The good news is, for most men, it's pretty straightforward to turn it all around, even if the thing you're most worried about is your penis size. Researching for this episode absolutely blew my mind, and it's going to blow yours as well. So buckle up, because joining me today is urologist and YouTube sensation, Dr. Rena Malik. Men are obsessed with getting as big as they can get. Mm-hmm. Should they be? Assuming they're in a heterosexual relationship, how much do women care?
So this is a great question. I'm glad you asked it, because ultimately 85% of women need some form of clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasm, which means that they don't need a penis penetrating them to achieve orgasm. And so some women actually find it uncomfortable to have a large penis penetrating them. And actually, when you look at the data, so the average penile length is about 5.1 to 5.7 inches, depending on the study you look at. When you look at the type of sex toys women buy, it's about 6 inches in length, which is obviously they're not putting the whole sex toy in, right? They're holding it at the end. So it's probably around the same length as the average length. And the girth is also similar to average girth. And so what that lends to itself is to say that women prefer what's around average on average. So the average woman appreciates the average size for them. And so having more can actually be painful. So some women find when it's longer, right, it's going to hit the cervix more likely. Some women find that very pleasurable and can even orgasm from that.
Whoa.
Whereas some women don't find that pleasurable and find it painful. And so it's really individual based on the person if they find that comfortable or enjoyable. And so not every woman wants a very large penis. We joke about it all the time. We talk about it all the time because society makes it seem like this is the be all end all, having a big penis, right? Women talk about it. Men make fun of other men. Like it's a whole thing, right? But it's all societal. It's not actually what happens in the bedroom.
I was looking up studies to see okay, is there data backing this up? And there was a really interesting one that I may have heard from you that if you look at the toys that women buy, across all these different companies that sell it, that to your point, they could get any size they want and they fall within that sort of average-ish range. So then what is it that you think? Because I don't think that society happens alone first, celebrating a big penis, and then, it just gets in our heads. I think there's probably a mix of it matters on some level. Now, maybe that's just purely psychological, but do you have a sense of psychological for men? Do you have a sense of what creates this societal obsession with size?
Well, I think that ultimately, as we were talking about kind of earlier, there's a lack of knowledge about how to pleasure women. And so women, the clitoris is the only organ in all of the human body that is specifically made for pleasure. And the clitoris is located above the urethra, so above the vagina, and wraps around the vagina like a wishbone. And so if you have a more girthy or larger penis, you may be more likely in some cases to cause orgasm through penetration than you would if you had maybe a more narrow or less, smaller penis. And so I think that's probably where it comes from, is that, obviously we know penetration is needed for reproduction. You have to have penetration, you have to deposit sperm, maybe having a longer penis makes sperm more likely to get into the cervix, but that hasn't been at least shown in the data to my knowledge. So ultimately, my thought is, and this is just a hypothesis, is that because if you're looking at only penetration as a source of pleasure and you're not looking at clitoral stimulation, then if you have a more girthy or a larger penis, you may be more likely to stimulate or push on some of that clitoral tissue to cause more pleasure.
Can a man actually enlarge his penis? Is that real?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, but can he do it safely? So there's lots of investigation in this area. In terms of length, they've looked at traction devices, which do show some benefit. So you can buy over-the-counter traction devices that if you use for prolonged periods of time, the first studies were like 6 to 8 hours a day for like months, right? And then you will see some improvement in length, like 2 centimeters.
Which, by the way, the first time I heard you say that, I thought that was a tiny amount because I was thinking 2 millimeters.
Yeah.
2 centimeters is like 3/4 of an inch.
It's all, yes. It's
That's
so I
legit.
said the same thing. I'm like, it's not that much, but it is something. So
It's 15%.
Yeah.
Based on the average.
Right, based on the average. So certainly you can. There are now newer traction devices on the market that claim to do similar with like 30 minutes twice a day. So you can use traction devices. Vacuum erection devices, which are different, they actually cause, the way they work is blood flows into the penis and it causes erections, right? And then that over time, they found that it does not contribute to length. Now, girth, some people will claim that it does, but when you look at sort of large scale data in humans, it has not shown to really be beneficial in terms of girth. And then there's
Just pump harder. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, some people will say you need to pump for 20 minutes a day or whatever. I don't claim to think that it really does that much, but maybe there's some, small studies that prove that. Ultimately, in terms of other things, right? So you can have surgical things to lengthen the penis. Now, they've done a whole bunch of different studies. They've used like bone grafts, they've used fat, they've used all sorts of different things. The newest thing on the market is called pneuma, which is an implant that you put in the penis that's like a sleeve. It's like a silicone sleeve that goes on top of the erectile tissue. Now, the initial data was very promising. I will say that I have seen personally patients with issues with that particular surgery.
And they do that to enlarge the penis?
It makes it girthier and enlarges it. So again, there is nothing that you can do that is not without risk of true serious damage to your penis, like losing sensation, having a bad outcome, having to have repeat surgery. So at this point in time, we don't have anything that is even nearly as safe as like a breast implant per se, because that's what people compare it to. They're like, well, women can enlarge their breasts. Why can't I enlarge my penis? And right now you could, but it's certainly not safe.
Yeah, surgery terrifies me. That strikes me as a really bad idea, unless you are just like in the micro zone.
Yeah.
But the traction thing, so I literally stopped the entire office yesterday and I was like, hey, for a second, can I talk as the host of a show and not the CEO of the company?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, sure. I said, penis enlargement is real. So when I first heard you say it about traction, I was like, there's no way this is real. And so I started like doing more research, and one, I went and looked at the actual study that you've been citing, the 2 centimeters. I was flabbergasted to see that that is actually a thing. So let's set aside all the super high risk stuff, because that really freaks me out, and I would not want anybody, because look, guys are so insecure about this. And so I don't want somebody to hear this and go grab a vacuum cleaner and try to like get
Please,
somewhere,
no.
right? Bad idea. You don't want to do something certainly surgically that could end up damaging the tissue. Now you're just in a way worse situation. But the traction. So what is traction, and how on the spectrum of safety, where does that one fall?
So essentially the way this particular traction device works, or this family of traction devices work, is it has like a little circle that goes around the penis, and then you put the penis in like the traction part of it, and then it gently puts it on stretch. So sort of like tissue expanders, like you're slowly using stretch.
Never heard of a tissue expander.
So sorry, in medicine, we do tissue expanders, for example, for breast implants. You will use a tissue expander to help make space for the implant. And so it's in a variety of different uses in medicine, but that's the most commonly known one. So essentially, you're using constant tension on the tissue to stretch it out, basically. And so that's how it works. And there's a whole variety of different ones, but generally speaking, they're just stretching the penis.
Is it like creating micro damage that then is being healed? And because you're stretching it so much in the damaged position, it gets bigger?
Well, so this is actually a good point, because some people will try to stretch it manually with a technique called jelqing. And so it's essentially using your fingers and like pressure to stretch it yourself. In that case, you can get micro tears and micro or traumas that can eventually lead to erectile dysfunction. And so I don't recommend that. These devices are actually meant to just put enough tension that you're just causing stretch, but you're not causing damage. So ideally, you want to get medical grade traction devices. If it looks too good to be true, don't buy it, right? Like, but medical grade traction devices are typically, tested and assessed for safety so that they're not going to harm the tissue. Now, risks are bruising. Certainly they can feel uncomfortable. It's just very difficult to sort of arrange your life in a way that you're constantly doing it. But if you're motivated enough, certainly people will make the time.
I'm telling you right now, there are guys out there that have the motivation, because I know in the beginning of this, you were saying that people were having to do it like 6 hours a day or something outrageous, and people were still doing it.
Yeah.
That seems crazy, but hey, now if it's 30 minutes twice a day, my question becomes, is there an upper limit? So I looked at the study and it was like, okay, if you do 30 days, it's like this increase, 60 days, it's more increase, 90 days, then it went all the way to the 2 centimeters. But they didn't say 120 days, there's no additional benefit. So 10 years from now, are people going to be backing up dump trucks to carry their stuff around? Like, where are we going? Do you think there's an upper bound?
Yeah, there probably is. Like, there's only so much you can stretch tissue, right? You're not going to the point where, I guess at some point you may start saying like, okay, this is not leading to more results. But again, they haven't studied that. So I couldn't tell you exactly when that's going to be. I mean, some people may see that their upper limit is at 30 days. Some people may see that it's at 90 days. I think it's going to be variable person to person. But ultimately, the other issue is, right, these are probably young, healthy guys they recruited in the study. Once you've developed issues with erections, so say you have the most common causes vascular problems or blood flow to the penis. Say you've developed vascular problems because you've got high blood pressure, diabetes, or some other like cholesterol or other issues that affect blood flow, then the tissues themselves will change if they're not getting regular erections. You won't have as much collagen content in your tissues, and it will then cause fibrosis or scarring, and then you're not going to be able to stretch that tissue as much as you would have if you did it when you were healthier, per se.
Okay, so erectile dysfunction is a super interesting topic in terms of what I will call a self-inflicted wound. So I know a lot of the conversation about it is this hormonal? Is this about low testosterone? From what I've seen in the literature, it seems to be like way more than, way out, getting close to 100% is blood flow problems. So how do we keep it healthy? And if somebody has gone down the ED path and they want to use traction, how do they back into a healthy state so that then they can extend?
So for erectile dysfunction, let's just start from the basics, right? Erectile dysfunction is caused by 5 major things, blood flow being the most common. It's particularly when you're older, above 50. In the younger age group, psychogenic causes are more common, meaning that it's because of stress, anxiety, or other factors that are playing a role. Performance anxiety, but it can be pervasive, not just around performance with a partner. And so that can make you feel like there's something organically wrong with you if you have a lot of anxiety surrounding getting an erection, period. Then there's neurologic issues. So diabetes does have both vascular and neurologic concerns. If you've had like prostate surgery, it can affect the nerves. So nerve conditions, spinal cord injuries, those sorts of things can also affect erections. Then hormonal is a really small subset. It's like 3 to 6% of all people who have ED. Is it solely hormonal? Now, giving you testosterone if you're low and you have ED may improve it incrementally. It's not going to reverse it completely. And I think that's really important. It may help somewhat, but that's really not the purpose of replacing testosterone by itself. And then there's medications that you're taking. Very often, high blood pressure medications will cause side effects of low inability to get erections, as well as antidepressants. Those are probably the most common medications we see. So in those categories, again, vascular is number 1, and that's because we have high rates of high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol in our society. And so we're seeing over 50% of men having erectile dysfunction above the age of 50. So it's like 50% at 50, 60% at 60, 70% at 70. It's very, very common. And so how do you prevent that? Well, anything you do that's good for your heart is going to be good for your penis, because the blood vessels to the penis are about 1 to 2 millimeters. when you look at the blood vessels to the heart, the coronary arteries are 3 to 4 millimeters. So when you develop some sort of plaque or buildup because of blood flow issues like high cholesterol or diabetes or high blood pressure, that will occlude blood flow. But you won't see it in terms of chest pain right away. You're going to first see it as erectile dysfunction. So we always tell our patients who have ED to make sure they get their heart checked, because about 15% of men 7 years after they get diagnosed with ED will have a heart attack.
Whoa.
So back to your question is, what can you do to prevent that? Is what is the best thing for your erections and your heart? So eating a heart healthy diet. Now, there's a lot of debate about diet, but the things we know is definitely eating low processed foods, eating healthy fruits and vegetables, and then trying to avoid processed meats for sure. We know that. And so those sorts of things will make your diet, increase your risk of these cardiovascular issues. So ultimately, that is one. 2 is exercise. So we actually see data that exercising, particularly cardiovascular exercise, like 3 to 5 times a week, trying to get 150 minutes of exercise a week, will actually improve erections and will reduce erectile dysfunction. So that's probably, those 2 things are the most powerful ways to keep yourself healthy and prevent erectile dysfunction.
Okay, I have got to ask. This is the question that eats up my entire brain when it comes to sex. Why on earth is the clitoris on the outside? At least like or maybe the better way to ask the question. In fact, please, dear editor, in the playback of this, put an image of the female anatomy. Mm-hmm. It is super unintuitive to me. So I know which image I want them to put up, so I'm going to describe it. So the clitoris looks very much like a flaccid penis, same sort of shaping if you understand the part that's inside the male body. Mm-hmm. Okay, so hopefully everybody knows that all humans, we start female and then we become male. So it is literally the same tissue that makes the clitoris, that makes the penis. It is really interesting to see that they are essentially the same shape. Yep. Pretty crazy. However, there's additional, do they call them legs or something? There's additional parts of the clitoris, 2 on each side, one that's quite sort of close to the vaginal canal, but then 2 more, 1 on each side, that are quite far. And so it begs the question, why bury so much of the clitoris inside the body? So girth, cool, I'm here for that. I understand that. But why the additional pieces that are so far away? Is that for like really big? I literally can't understand.
In terms of the male anatomy, right? If you think about it, the penis also goes deep into the pelvis and goes down, right? But men are not getting perineal stimulation all the time. I mean, sometimes they may get a little bit of pressure when they're having intercourse, or if it's intentional, they might be getting perineal pressure, which is, that space underneath the scrotum in front of the anus. And so there is erectile tissue there. So, I don't think that evolutionarily, I'm not sure why we're built the way we are in terms of like, why is there legs of erectile tissue that go that far? But ultimately, I think in terms of female anatomy, I think, yes, it's the bigger question to me is like, why is it not obvious? Like, why is it not obvious to stimulate the clitoris? Like, if you just saw anatomy and you didn't know anything, you would just think, okay, penis goes in vagina. That is what makes sense, right?
Why not line the inside of the vagina with the clitoris? Like, why isn't it just
there's a urethra
penis
in the way? So I don't, the issue is the urethra is there, and so I think that is.
You think that's what evolution has to contend with?
Well, so in a man, right, the urethra is underneath the erectile tissue as well, right? So very similarly, the female urethra is below the clitoral shaft. And so I think ultimately it just sort of, that's how it came about. But yes, I agree. I think it's very counterintuitive that that the organ for pleasure is separate from the vagina. And I think the other important thing is that some women have a shorter length between the clitoris and the vaginal opening than others. And they've actually looked at studies that have shown that people with a shorter length between the clitoris and the vaginal opening are more likely to orgasm through vaginal penetration and more likely to enjoy vaginal penetration or find that to be their primary route of orgasm.
Okay, this is so interesting. I am going to guess that these studies don't exist yet, but if anybody out there is listening, I beg of you to do this study. Given the way the anatomy is, where two parts of the clitoris hug the vaginal canal, I'd be very curious to know if there's like a tighter that hug is, the more likely they are to orgasm from penetration. But going back to the stat you said at the beginning, 80% of women cannot climax from penile thrusting alone, which has been the shock of my life when I came across that. Longtime listeners of my show will know that I became obsessed as a teenager with learning female anatomy because I did not want to be the guy that didn't know where the clitoris was. So everybody listening to this, I highly encourage you to familiarize yourself with the female anatomy. I asked my wife this morning, I said, look, I can draw the female anatomy. Can you? She can't. So anyway, a pat on my own back there for learning that. But understanding how that works. So I'd love to know if there's any relationship there. But it begs the question, the placement of the clitoris internally, why women don't prefer bigger toys. So if your hypothesis is right, that's to provide pleasure based on girth, why don't they go for crazy girthy toys?
Well, so that's interesting. That study that I told you about, the sex toy study, was made because they were designing, so with transgender surgery, they were figuring out what is the optimal girth for a neophallus. So that's where they sort of came about with this study, is because they don't want to make them too girthy, because they often use forearm flaps. And so you can imagine if you take a big flap of tissue from your forearm and you roll it up, it can get quite girthy. And so patients were coming back and saying, I love the way it looks, but I can't penetrate my partner. And so there is sort of an average width and length of the vagina, which then doubles when you're getting aroused. But there is a limit to it, right? It will stretch. Obviously, you can push a baby out of a vagina, so it will stretch, but sometimes that's not comfortable. Now, there's a lot of reasons why maybe they choose smaller toys, but also they can manipulate those toys to stimulate different parts of the vagina, right? They can angle it a certain way or move it up or down or to the side. And so that, I think, allows them to be more directed and not feel so unwieldy about putting a very girthy instrument in the vagina.
This episode is brought to you by OneSkin. If you're like myself and my wife and do just about everything you can to take care of your body, sadly, you are still going to age. That is just a fact. But, my friends, there are emerging solutions based on rigorous research and science that help reverse the aging of your skin at the cellular level. That's exactly what the founders of OneSkin did to develop the OS1 peptide that is scientifically proven to deactivate the zombie cells that are no longer functioning correctly due to age, literally reversing your skin's biological age. Their products have over 4,000 five-star reviews, so you should give it a try for yourself. For a limited time, Impact Theory listeners can get 15% off OneSkin products using the code IMPACT15 at oneskin.co. Again, that's 15% off at oneskin.co and use the code IMPACT15.
This is so intriguing to me. Okay, so in an N of 1 experiment, it would seem that vaginas come in as many shapes and sizes as penises. But what you just said makes it seem like there's a relative, and maybe it's just bell curve again, that there's a relatively narrow variation.
They're going to come in all different shapes or sizes. just like a man does, right? But we know the averages, just like we know the averages for men. And we also know that they will increase in width and length to prepare for intercourse. And there's sort of variation in terms of also pelvic floor muscle tone. So when you think about your pelvic floor, which is this bowl of muscles that you sit on, and they're essentially hold up your organs, your bladder, your rectum, in women the vagina and the urethra. These can get tense, and so when they're tense, that can cause narrowing of the introitus or discomfort with penetration. And so very often when you're trying to penetrate yourself, if you're like in a rush and just want to get it done and you put some lube on, essentially you're not allowing yourself time to prepare for the insertion of, whatever it is. And I think ultimately, yes, I think there's variation. I think, again, when your pelvic floor is maybe a little weaker because of having multiple babies or having a job where you're standing a long time, putting pressure on those muscles for years and years and years, those muscles will weaken. And then you will you will have essentially a more relaxed or pliable vagina than you would if it was tense. And so we often see like younger women who haven't had babies have a little bit more tension in their pelvic floor than women who've had babies, because they've sort of relaxed those muscles and they've gotten a little weaker.
So when people talk about vaginal reconstruction post giving birth, are they talking about the pelvic floor? Like, is there a tear in the muscle, or what's being reconstructed?
Yeah, so it depends. But typically when you're talking about pelvic floor weakness after giving birth, that will typically result in maybe like a bulge or like a hernia, almost called prolapse. And then
What's prolapsing?
the vaginal skin is prolapsing, and then whatever is behind it. So people will say, my bladder's falling out. It's not actually your bladder. It's actually the vagina, but the bladder's behind it, or the uterus, or the rectum. And so you're essentially getting a weakness in the floor of the pelvis. And then when you reconstruct that, you're essentially rebuilding that pelvic floor. And that pelvic floor is muscles, but it's also ligaments that hold up those muscles. And so all those things together, you can use those things to reconstruct. Now, if you're talking about like cosmetic reconstruction, that's typically trying to tighten the muscles at the very bottom, the levator muscles, to make them to make the introitus smaller, to make it a little bit smaller.
The introitus, what's that?
The opening, sorry, the vaginal opening. Yeah. And so that is typically done for people who have prolapse as a non-cosmetic. Like if you have prolapse, then making the vaginal opening smaller, because it does open or get wider when you have weakness, can actually help prevent the prolapse from coming back. But in some cases, people want it to look a certain way, and they'll do this surgery electively to sort of make that opening smaller.
Okay, so that one sounds more aesthetics, but if you're doing vaginal reconstruction, obviously I'm going off of only jokes that I've heard, because my wife we've never had kids. But the joke you hear is that actually can make women tighter. Is that actually accurate?
So it's only gonna make the introitus smaller, and it may help pull together some of those muscles, right? But in order to keep your pelvic floor, if your pelvic floor is weak, let's specify if your pelvic floor is weak, then you need to work it out just like you do anything else, like you do Kegel exercises or other exercises to strengthen those muscles and keep them strengthened. And then whereas if it's tight, you don't want to do things to strengthen them, you want to do things to relax it.
One hypothesis I have long had about things that make guys insecure is a mismatch. So if you have a guy with a large penis and a woman with a small vagina, you're going to have a problem. If you have a woman with a large vagina and a man with a small penis, you're going to have a problem. As a urologist, is that something you encounter, or am I just way off base?
No, you are absolutely correct. In fact, there is actually a purchasable item that you can buy that you can put on your penis if you're very well endowed, that will actually shorten the length of the amount that will be inserted, and so it'll be more comfortable for your partner. So clearly it's a problem that someone has decided to try and rectify with an item that actually works quite well.
I hate everyone with that problem, by the way.
And then in terms of the other way around, I mean, like we've talked about already, yes, it can be a problem in terms of orgasming with penetration, but again, there's other alternatives to achieve pleasure, and that's sort of what I tell patients if they're having that trouble is like, you have 10 fingers, you have devices you can buy. There's lots of things you can do to help get your partner to achieve pleasure that do not involve penetration.
Glad you bring that up. So I heard, I think it was you that said this. Let me see if I can remember this correctly. 45% of women do have an orgasm with a first-time male partner. But 95% of women have an orgasm with a first-time female partner.
Yeah.
That is outrageous. If you're insecure about whether you are pleasuring your partner, take heed of that stat. It's obviously not a requirement anyway for you to have a jumbo. But why is it that lesbian encounters have just a demonstrably higher, an order of magnitude higher ability to make each other orgasm on first encounter?
Well, so two reasons. One is they've spent their whole lives learning how to pleasure themselves, right? And so they know how to achieve pleasure in female anatomy. They're more familiar with female anatomy. They know what to do. But the other big thing is when you have two people of the same gender, they have to talk because one person can give pleasure and one person can receive pleasure, right? And you don't know who that's going to be unless you actually talk about it, right? So there's open communication from the very beginning. Whereas I think in heterosexual encounters, we're so focused on being polite, right? We don't want to like, oh, I don't like that. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings. So you might not open up and say, oh, I actually like this better or I like it this way. In fact, we see in studies where there's women of all different ages, that women who are a bit older tend to have better satisfaction with their sex life and better orgasmic outcomes, probably because they're more likely to talk about what they want and know what they want.
Yeah, this comes back to just I am utterly shocked that the clitoris is on the outside. I have a hypothesis that I want to run by you.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with evolution. Research, a lot of it, trying to understand the human experience through the lens of evolution has been transformative for me in being able to predict the outcome of my own actions, to be able to predict other people's behaviors. I would say ignore that at one's own peril. When I look at our close relatives, the bonobos, one thing that they do for inter-tribe cooperation, or I should say intra-tribe cooperation, is if there's friction between two females, they will go up and they will touch each other's genitals, reassure each other. I don't know that they go all the way to climax, but it is certainly genital-based contact. And I would imagine that at this stage in human evolution, that's probably not a big role, but it's interesting to think that if you start stacking these things, so you have to contend with their urethra, and so that's going to maybe cause if you understand the idea of the blind watchmaker, which I think is a great analogy given to us, I think by Richard Dawkins, around, okay, you have all these things that look incredibly complicated, but they were not made with intention. They were just over extraordinarily long periods of time. You have one little mutation and another and another and another, and you get there. And so if you are like the giraffe has a vein or a nerve in it that like just makes this ridiculously circuitous trip down around the neck and back up. But if you assume that the neck was sort of growing at the same time that this thing was growing in the beginning, it might not have been a big deal, but over time becomes very weird. So if you think of that same thing with the clitoris, that if it, one, had to contend with the urethra, two, that there was some sort of advantage to some part of it being exposed, that meaning it is exposed specifically for non-penetrative reasons. Because I think you would agree with me, just from if you were trying to make a woman orgasm from penetrative sex, you would just make the inside of the vagina as sensitive as the outside of the penis. I mean, it is crazy how sensitive that is. So what do you think about that hypothesis?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting hypothesis, particularly with the backdrop of how women used to reassure other women. Maybe that was a thing. Like maybe that was a big part of society back in the day. Or maybe, if you think about evolution, and this is again hypothesis, as you're talking, I'm sort of formulating this, but maybe, the goal is procreation, right? If women were constantly being stimulated during penetrative intercourse, perhaps it wouldn't be, then it would be like, okay, well, men are going to, you need men to climax, to ejaculate. So maybe it's to make sure that women will not climax, first and then say, oh, I don't want any more penetration, because the goal is to deposit sperm. And maybe that's it. I don't know. This is again hypothesis, but
I love that.
as you're talking, that's what's going on in my head.
That, oh my God. I don't know how that never occurred to me, but a woman climaxing first, look, I suppose because women are multi-orgasmic, maybe that doesn't answer the question. Man, for a second, I was so there.
Well, the refractory period, as we know, men have some portion of an absolute refractory period where they cannot have sex again, whether it's minutes to hours to whatever. And so there is some portion of time where like you could not get an erection if you wanted to. Now that could be really short in young guys and it can be really long in older guys, and it's variable person to person. But perhaps it's because like the orgasm from direct stimulation would also cause some, to go back, when you have that refractory period, very often there's increased sensitivity of the penis. So maybe that's where I'm thinking that maybe if you had sort of erectile tissue right around the vagina, it would become too sensitive for you to allow continued penetration. Whereas if a woman orgasms, it's sensitive, but it's not where you're penetrating. So that's why you can continue.
Man, that's really interesting. Do you have a hypothesis on why women are multi-orgasmic? I get why men would be single, because certainly the shape of the penis will just then create its own problem as it removes the semen it just deposited. But why are women multi-orgasmic?
Well, so not all women are, but yes, there's certainly more evidence of women being multi-orgasmic in the literature, and we hear about it. But it may be that, again, like I said, because the sensitivity is only in the clitoris and you can continue to penetrate vaginally, then you're still stimulating the area, but it's okay that it's sensitive, and so you probably get past that absolute refractory period quicker. And you can keep going. Whereas like with a man, you'd be like, I really can't right now. I need a few minutes, right, before you can go again.
Yeah, that one is very intriguing. And I won't lie that I am a little jealous of the ability. Okay, setting monkeys and evolution aside, what does good sex look like? Because I think that there is an astonishing lack of understanding, which I would not have predicted. You and I were talking before we started rolling. I would have thought that in the internet age, everybody would have an understanding of female anatomy. Everybody would understand what women are looking for. But there's something, I think, about just the velocity and volume of information that people are just sort of dizzied by it. So help people. What do women want?
So I think let's just talk about in general what makes good sex first. So I think the big key that people are missing is everyone's rushing to get an orgasm. But the point of good sex is to allow yourself to be completely vulnerable to that person. So being able to be completely vulnerable, it doesn't have to be that you're intimate with them, like in a loving relationship, but you have to be vulnerable to allow yourself to have good sex. You have to be mindful in the moment to enjoy the sex. That means you have to forget about all the stress in your life and like be really focused on the moment, and you have to enjoy the journey, right? It's not just about the orgasm. It's about actually enjoying every little bit of sex for you and your partner, and that's different for every person. Some people may like a leisurely, long bodily exploration that follows, until you finally penetrate and then you find the orgasm. Some people may not want penetration at all. Some people may want a really quick experience, but whatever it is, you should be enjoying that entire experience and not just waiting for climax. And I think that's the key, is that one is really being mindful, being vulnerable, and two, also talking to your partner. Now, it doesn't mean talking to them in that exact moment. Of course, feedback is good and important, but you want to be thoughtful. This is a very sacred space for a lot of people, and they don't know how to take constructive criticism until you've started talking about it outside the bedroom. And so I think that's really important in general for good sex, because if your brain is there, if you're focused on it, if you're enjoying the journey, you're going to have great orgasms and it's going to be great. And so I think that's one. And then two, I think for men to know about women is one is that women take time to get aroused. So during the arousal process, as I mentioned earlier, the vagina prepares itself for penetration. It increases lubrication, it lengthens, it widens. The cervix moves up and out of the way to allow for the phallus to penetrate. So if you don't allow that to happen, sex will be painful, or at worst painful, but at best, okay, mediocre, not as good as it could be. And so ultimately, it's really important to include enough foreplay so that your partner is ready, and each person's a little bit individually different. The other thing I would say is adding lubricant to the bedroom is not scandalous. Like, it's great. It can add a lot of fun and pleasure, and women's amount of lubrication is not always correlated with how excited they are about the encounter. So some women will make a lot and not be really that into it. Some people will make little, and it's a variety of different factors. It can be genetic, it can be hormonal, it can be medications they're on, it can be the age of life they're in, the stage of life they're in. But ultimately, that's not a reflection of how turned on they are. And so don't take it personally if you're with someone and they're not as lubricated, or vice versa. Like, you need to be communicating and make sure they're into it. So I think those are things that are really easy for people to include. And then, I think ultimately a lot of men focus on like making sure their partner orgasms. Ideally, if you're not, you should be thinking about that, because their pleasure is obviously just as important. But I think ultimately, like, if they are not orgasming with whatever you're doing, it's okay to bring toys in the bedroom, right? Like, we use microwaves to heat up our food instead of using a fire. So we can use toys to enhance our sexual experience. And I think ultimately those sorts of things are really valuable in terms of transforming your sexual experience. And then the other big key is talking to your partner. So not in the bedroom, but like outside of the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the car, figuring out like, hey, what do you like? What turns you on? And, really getting into that and being non-judgmental if someone says something. But even for you, you should give feedback like, hey, babe, I really like it when you do this. It really turns me on. And you giving feedback too about what you like, and sort of like really making it so that you both are getting an experience that you're excited about, and realizing like some things that turn you on may not turn her on, or vice versa. In a heterosexual relationship, we're being specific here about heterosexual, but I think it all applies to any gender. But really just writing down what you're into, incorporating different things, incorporating novelty, and just keep the doors of communication open.
Okay. Yes, communication for sure, I would say, is a key part of this. That was one of the things in my before I was actually successful with women, just reading about article after article, it was always communication. And my mom once said something to me that I think goes along with your first tip, which was, she said, a woman has to trust you to be able to have an orgasm. And I was like, what? Like, that didn't ever occur to me, because as a guy, that just is not on the menu of things that I would think about. I mean, if I actively distrusted the person, maybe it would be harder, but even then, I'm pretty sure we'd be just fine. But that was really eye-opening. And so discovering what the person likes. Now, what about people that don't know what they like? So I can pretty much guarantee that there are people listening to this right now that have never used any toys. And so they don't even maybe understand, what do you mean? Toys for what? Like, I already have a penis. Penis is whatever. I can't come from penile thrusting, so why would I want a dildo? Is basically what I can hear people thinking.
Right. So one, I think as a couple, you can experiment, and then by yourself. So, in terms of our sensations, like the areas of our spinal cord that take outputs or inputs and then send them to our brain, it can be touch, which is what we're always using, right? Touch, temperature, and vibration. And so you can experiment with all of those things. You can use light touch, like a feather. You can use firm touch. You can use different pressures of touch. You can use different temperatures of lubricants or things. Like, for example, I had a spinal cord patient. I remember he had an injury to his spinal cord, and the only way he could orgasm, because his connections were messed up, were when he put his feet in ice cold water.
Whoa.
And so
how did he discover that?
I mean, I think, he was told experiment with temperature. And so he really experimented and that's how he got there. And so, there's things, and vibration is very powerful. In fact, there's plenty of data that vibration with a toy or whatever can actually improve orgasms, improve blood flow to the genitals. So it's not just that it's the sensation, but it's actually increasing blood flow of the area.
I assume we're talking about for women?
For both. So men don't use vibration enough, and they may actually find that it's quite pleasurable to use vibration, and they may have more intense orgasms. So in terms of exploring your body as a female would be, again, take a mirror and look down there, right? That's the first step. I think so many women haven't even done that first step. Men look at their penis every day, right? But you can imagine the number of women where they come into my office, I bring a mirror in while I examine them, and they're like, I've never looked at myself.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so so I will go through all their anatomy with them so they feel empowered about what they're looking at down there. So they know where their clitoris is, where their urethra is, where the lips, which lip is which, and what does this mean? And, that there's this area is different than this area. And so that is powerful. So take a mirror, look down there, and then just explore. Feel the different areas, use your hands, see what feels good. And, when you stimulate the clitoris, you need to have lube. There's no lubrication that the clitoris is making, so you'll need some lube for it to be comfortable for most people. So explore that area, figure out what feels good. Some people like, stimulation on the right side. Some people like on the left side. Some people like in a circular motion. Everyone's a little bit different, right? But really exploring what you enjoy. And if you feel weird about it, get your partner in on it with you because they'll find it fun, right? Like if you guys are in an exploratory mode, you can start, one of the sex therapy techniques you do is called sensate focus. So when you're having issues in the bedroom, you'll say, okay, we're not going to focus on penetration today. We're just going to focus on touching non-erogenous areas like your arm or your belly or whatever. You're just going to touch all the areas and see what you like. And then after that, you move towards genital touching and you find different areas of genitals, like what feels good. And then you finally move to penetration. And by that point, you've sort of mapped out your body to figure out what really feels good and what is actually pleasurable. And the same thing can be done for men, right? Experiment with what parts of the penis feel good. Does it feel better on the head? Does it feel better on the shaft? Feel the perineum, the area where the erectile tissue is underneath the skin, and you may find pleasure there. Some men even find pleasure with prostate play because there's a lot of nerves there. And so, if you feel open to that, that's fine. I think ultimately just figuring out what is enjoyable to you and is very empowering in leading to better sexual experiences.
How long should sex last?
So that's a good question. I think when you talk about how long average sex lasts, when you look at the data, and they only look at penetrative sex. So they actually gave people stopwatches to measure, from the woman would measure start to finish of penetrative intercourse. And that's how they got this data. And so what they found was that the average length of sex was about 5 to 6 minutes. And it was actually variable by country. So in the UK, it was 10 minutes. And
Whoa.
in Turkey, it was I forget, it was 5 minutes or something, but it's variable by country.
The UK is actually double the average?
Yeah, I think it was 10 minutes.
That's so unexpected. My wife is British. So okay. Intriguing.
So yeah, but ultimately, I mean, it's not as long as we think it is, right? It's usually about 5 to 6 minutes on average. And that's penetration. That doesn't include the foreplay and any other type of sex, right? We're not talking about oral sex, anal sex. This is just penis in vagina penetrative sex. And so that's the average. Now, how long it should last really depends on you and your partner, right? There's certain things in terms of how long it takes till you ejaculate. That is sort of, very individual. But in terms of the entire encounter, that's totally up to you and your partner what you're in the mood for. Some people like long, luxurious lovemaking. Some people like quick, quickies, few minutes and done, because that's what brings them pleasure and joy. And they get to feel connected and bonded even in that short period of time. So I think it really depends on what your ultimate goal is.
How in control do you think guys should be? I know there's a medical definition for premature ejaculation, but you watch a porn and you see a guy go for 50 minutes of just insane acrobatic, hitting it as hard as he can. And I'm just good Lord. So how in control should a guy be?
Well, let's talk about porn briefly. So a lot of these porn actors will use things to help them last longer. So some of them will have penile implants.
Get out of here.
Some of them will
Is
have.
there data on that?
This is just anecdotal. Like, I know people who work in areas with lots of porn actors, and they treat a lot of them. So some of them will have implants. Some of them will inject themselves right before the act. And obviously these are productions, right? So they're edited and cut, but they have trained themselves, right, to last for long durations.
So you can
for
train
those
yourself.
You know, I think there is some degree of being able to train yourself, but I don't like people to stress about it, because that's their profession. That's what they chose to do as their job. Now, if you talk about how long women want sex to last, on average, it's about 25 minutes. And that includes the whole thing, right? Men say about 16 minutes.
Well, so but do they want 3 minutes of foreplay and 22 minutes of penetrative sex? And we have a huge gap that it normally lasts 5 minutes and they really want way more?
I would venture to say probably not. I would say most women probably are sufficiently satisfied with average to a little bit above average. But I think, and again, it's variable person. Some women don't even like penetrative intercourse, right? Because they don't climax from penetrative intercourse. They want clitoral stimulation, right? So like, yeah, they're like, it feels good, it feels great, but it's not going to make them orgasm. So, you know, those people may say, you know what, I don't really care. I like the rest of the stuff we're doing. And some people may love penetrative intercourse because that's how they orgasm and they want more of it. But again, it's very individualized, you know, and I think we put a lot of pressure on people. So in terms of medical definitions, premature ejaculation is like within a minute or 2 minutes, if you look at whichever society you look at. But my definition is it bothering you or your partner? Because that's what really matters, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's 3 minutes or 4 minutes, but if you're not happy and your partner's not happy, then we can work on it, right? In terms of 50 minutes, that would be considered delayed ejaculation based on medical definitions. So we usually say if it's like 30 minutes or longer, and it's bothersome, it's considered delayed ejaculation. And I will tell you, I see patients with delayed ejaculation. They are not happy. They are frustrated because it takes so long and so much effort for them to ejaculate. And their partner is probably not that happy, although they're not going to say anything to them because it's a long time. And, you know, at some point it's like, okay, like let's move on. So I think it really depends.
This is fun, but I've got places to be.
But, you know, I think ultimately, like, there's a lot of things that media has perpetuated, like, oh, sex should be long, sex should be a certain way, there should be so much ejaculate volume, there should be so much squirting and all this stuff. And like, in reality, like, what matters is that you're satisfied and your partner's satisfied and that you're connected whatever way you're trying to get to be connected. If you're in an intimate relationship, that you're feeling bonded. If it's just for sex, that you're actually both feeling pleasure and enjoying the time.
All right. Let's ask the hard questions. So, first time encounters, consenting adults, we will make that assumption. That's the anxiety-ridden one. Like, my wife and I now, we've communicated so much. In fact, my wife and I have communicated so much, you run the risk of, like, we have the greatest hits and we just play the greatest hits album every time. And so there you almost have to do things that are suboptimal just to keep it spicy. Like, this isn't my favorite, but because if we do my favorite every time, it gets boring. Anyway, first encounters. When you take your pants off, is this going to be a wow moment? Are we matched up? What assumptions should I make? So again, going back to that stat, 45% of women orgasm the first encounter with a male. That means 55% don't. So the odds are not with us on the first encounter. So what can we do to up our odds that will be an amazing encounter?
So the first thing you can do is before the encounter, be like, hey, what turns you on? What excites you?
Really?
Right? Because that way you go in with a map, you go in with a blueprint. You know what is going to make them turned on.
What date do you think? Okay, this is very interesting. So a lot
all
of guys
part
are
of
going
the
to try to
foreplay.
close on date number 1.
Yeah.
But man, this is just N of 1, admittedly. So maybe guys are more, sex is moving in the wrong direction as far as I can tell right now. So I'm going to assume these guys are in a way worse situation than I was. So
say they've just met is your kind of point.
Yeah. And like, admittedly, you are trying to like play with that line, right? Because to go from, hi, my name is Tom to we're having sex, Like that's a big chasm to cross.
Yeah.
So admittedly, you do start to get playful, but if you're going for first or second date sex, I can't imagine having like a really sort of, hey, like what turns you on kind of conversation. You're hoping that spark happens, you can feel it, you see the look in their eye, you go for the kiss, they reciprocate, and it goes well.
In
Could
those,
be a failure of imagination on my
yeah,
part.
in those circumstances, I would say while you're in the act, you can sort of be like, hey, do you like this? Is this good? You're asking for feedback, right?
And you have an instinct that women will like that kind of conversation.
I mean, it has to be done in the right way, right? But like if you're attentive and you want to pleasure a woman, I think she's going to find that very sexy, right? Like she's going to be like, wow, he's really wanting to make sure that I feel good. Like that's great. You know, if 55% of the time women are not having an orgasm and this one guy is like, oh my God, I want to make sure that you're feeling good. Like, wow, that's kind of hot, right? That's kind of actually good. And so I think it's really important. And yeah, fine. I get that. I think the first time sex, again, I think it's a lack of knowledge. I think if lesbians can have 95% orgasm rate, there is a lack of knowledge of what pleasure, what women enjoy. And so there needs to be some evaluation. Are you providing clitoral stimulation? Are you, what works for the majority of women is clitoral stimulation. So maybe you're not doing enough of that, or maybe you're too aggressive or too light or like whatever, but kind of evaluate what you're doing. But likely if you're providing good clitoral stimulation, she's going to orgasm. So I think that's probably the biggest key in these first time encounters. Yeah, you might get it wrong sometimes, but like everyone's a little different. But as you get into more of a serious relationship, I think those conversations about what turns you on is really important.
Yeah, no doubt whatsoever. Yeah, I mean, as a PSA, if you are having a first-time encounter, guys, I will say that the beeline to the clitoris, technically, actually, okay, in fact, I'm going to run you through what I would say this is the playbook to run. I'm a guy. I only have so much experience. So it'd be amazing, given that you've seen so many people and are a woman yourself. Tell me where this advice goes astray so that guys can really do a good job. Okay. First and foremost, respect for your partner. So you want to make it fun and exciting, but you want to make sure she feels safe.
100%.
Trust is going to be, if my mom is right, and life has certainly taught me that this seems like a very good rule, that the woman has to trust you before she's going to be able to have an orgasm. So I get it. You want to be tough and manly and all that, but I would advise against leading with like hand on the throat and all this crazy shit that you will see in porn. So I want her to feel desired. I want her to feel seen as an individual. So to your point, I'm going to try something and I'm really going to be paying attention to cues. I'm going to hit the erogenous zones. The reason that I started this is I said beeline to the clitoris. I actually wouldn't do that.
Right.
So I would tease, I would be playful, starting in other areas. And this may be where you tell me my advice goes astray. On a first encounter, I'm going to keep it pretty vanilla. I'm not going to try any of the more extravagant things maybe at some point. I do want to try, but would not want to try without communication. Yeah, I'm going to go slow. I'm going to try to warm her up. I'm going to remember something I've heard you say, that women take like 25 minutes to, you said for the whole experience, but some significant portion of that is going to be what we would traditionally call foreplay. So pre-penetration, again, really looking for signals that she's enjoying what I'm doing. If I'm unclear, I'd probably ask in the sexiest way I can muster, do you like this? And then oftentimes, not always, so I'd have to really read the situation, but oftentimes a woman will make it clear when she wants you to go for penetrative sex. I would operate under the philosophy if this is a first-time encounter, I'm not going to be able to make her orgasm through penetrative sex, so I'm going to go straight for oral, if I'm completely honest, to try to make her orgasm first. If she introduces a toy, oh my God, so much easier. But, at least in my experience, the toys that are effective are going to be external. They're going to be vibrative in nature. And cool. If it's one that can be used simultaneously with penetration, amazing. If it can't, then I'm going to make sure she's taken care of first. And all the while, again, you want to be confident. I would say you want to take leadership. You don't want to wait for her to tell you what to do. I mean, if that's her thing, you'll figure that out pretty fast. But I would base assumption it's not. Base assumption you want to be in a leadership role. Base assumption you want to keep it vanilla. You want to make her, you want to show that you're paying attention, that you can be trusted. How does that feel as first-time encounter advice?
I think that's excellent advice. I would say that foreplay, though, starts at the beginning of the date.
Oh, facts.
So yes, this is all great. This is exactly what I think the majority of women would want. There's probably some women who would be like, no way, that's not me. I don't like a lot of foreplay or whatever. But the majority of women, this blueprint would work. And I will refer your listeners to a book called She Comes First by Ian Kerner. It actually has like images and visuals, like drawn out animations, like literally it's a how-to guide. It's very, very good. It focuses on clitoral stimulation. And so I think it's a great guide for people to look at. And I think ultimately, yes, foreplay starts at the beginning of the date. So the palm of the hand is very powerful. So even just touching the palm of the hand and getting that touch in early on is a part of foreplay and can actually be really powerful.
That's really smart. Yes. So the brain is the biggest sexual organ in the body. And so being able to tap into that, here would be my best advice for guys. And I forget who said this. Damn it. I heard this recently too. My apologies to whoever said this. But if you want to be intimate with a woman, become a man who's worthy of that give. And that begins even before the date. And then on the date, it's really about demonstrating that you can be interested in them. That you ask questions and you're really listening, and that your answers show that you're engaged and that you're dialed in to what they're talking about, that you're not trying to please them, that you are being yourself. One thing that went really right for my now wife and I, on our first date, we both thought it was going to be a fling. So we were both completely unafraid of loss. Like, if she's into me, cool, then this can go somewhere.
That's
if she's not, whatever.
Works out, right?
Yeah. And admittedly, my journey, and again, my listeners will have heard this 1,000 times, but my journey was going from, and this is literal, showing up on the first date with flowers and a custom written poem.
Oh my gosh.
And getting nowhere, right? Because
That's
what
a
a
lot.
turnoff.
That's
but
a lot.
It seemed like a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
It was terrible. Would like everybody to hear that. And then finally understanding that this really is a game about finding your own confidence, knowing what you're about, not being afraid to be that, and then being a filtering mechanism for who's into who I actually am.
Yeah.
And then you have a shot.
And I just want to emphasize respect, right? And I think that we spend a lot of time talking about how men should please women. I do too, but I'm a mother of 2 sons, and I will say you feeling respected is just as important.
Facts.
And so, like, if you feel like you're on a date with someone and you're not getting that respect, then they're not warranting all that time and attention and pleasure from you either. So I think just like we talk a lot about this, and it's important, it's super important, but I also want to say, like, as a man, you are worthy of pleasure and you are worthy of attention and respect.
I love that. I'm very glad that you said that. There's a weird thing happening now. Are you familiar with the red pill movement?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Please, I beg of you, your content is so good. I would love for you to really go into that, because the guys that are coming to you, if they're under 35, they are at a minimum familiar with the ideas being purported in the red pill community. And it's possible that they're a devotee. And so as somebody who wants to see men be successful, and I understand what it is that they're responding to positively in the red pill movement, which I think is a reaction to a real push to sort of effeminize men and to tell them that their sort of natural inclinations to aggression or whatever, or ambition, are bad. And so now you have these guys that are like, not only is it not bad, like take over the world, conquer everything. I want to play you a clip.
Okay.
So in fact, if we can cue that up, I love that you're saying that men are worthy of that. I think that's incredible. And men, I hope you hear that. But if you let yourself go down a particular path, you set up an antagonism between men and women that is devastating. And so this clip sort of sums that up for me.
Why?
Female vaginas are disgusting.
No, they're not.
Do you eat vagina? Exactly. Point proven.
No point proven.
You don't do it. Why should I do it?
Women are supposed to do certain things that men can't do. Women are very talented, beautiful creatures. You can give life, we can't do that. It's fine. You can give head, we can't do that. This is not for the G's. I don't know who's out here doing this, but it ain't me. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of men out there who will do it.
Do you not want to please your woman, though?
There's plenty of ways to please a woman without doing that.
That's a big factor. That's a good one, sexually.
Maybe for you, I think that it's possible to please a woman without it.
Yeah, it can be.
Okay, so I don't think it's something that is conducive to a healthy relationship. It's not something I'm very interested in, personally.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I go crazy. For me, what I don't understand is, like, why it's such a stern no, because why wouldn't you want to please your woman? You know, because have you not ever seen...
Like I said before, it's a woman's job to please a man, not the other way around.
No, that is actually ridiculous. When it comes to being intimate and in the bedroom, it's not. It's like... When you do something for someone, have you not seen how, and they like it, have you not seen how much they perform better? And I'm not just talking sexually, like in general.
I don't want to sound like an asshole, but a woman's ejaculation is irrelevant. You only need one ejaculation to create life, and that's the man's. Now, with that said, does that mean I'm not going to please my girl or whatever? Of course I will, but it's elective.
Definitely shit in bed.
Just like a woman's, duty to go to work is elective, my duty to please her sexually is elective.
That is ridiculous.
How's that ridiculous?
Because, oh, no.
Oh, you know what? How about this? With that logic, I'm just going to stop paying the bills.
Okay.
That would be ridiculous,
I'll have to
wouldn't
go
it be?
work then.
Sex in and of itself is boring. Any man who sits and says that sex is great or sex is fun just clearly hasn't had enough sex, because sex is boring. Sex is a chore. Sex is like food. You don't really care unless you're really hungry, and then you eat.
He's
and
not
you don't
having
care
good
again.
sex.
A guy getting his girl off is elective. They should do it, but they don't have to. Just like I think a man has to work and his woman
Okay,
shouldn't
we'll just
have
do it and then just see what you get different results. That's all I'm saying.
to. I don't do that.
We get the gist. You can
Yeah.
stop it.
It's pretty horrifying.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
I think that this is just inappropriate, right? Like there should be equality in pleasure. And if you respect someone, this comes down to respect, right? I'm saying there should be equal respect. Men and women should respect each other. And if there's disrespect on either side, then that's not a relationship worth having, right? And same thing goes with sex. If you their partners are not going to feel safe and vulnerable to actually enjoy sex, these people might as well just go buy a Fleshlight, because they don't need a person. They just need something to get them off. And they're not even valuing what that is.
Yeah. So this worries me a lot, because there's something happening because I think there is a real shift in culture that this is an echo of. And so I don't want anybody watching this to think that I don't empathize with whatever's happening culturally that's leading people down this path. But down that path you will, by my estimation, you will end up missing out on something incredible, which is having an equal partner that you can contend with. So when I think of my wife as, because in the beginning of our relationship, I thought I needed to be better than her at everything. And that was the only way that she would find me sexually attractive. And it ends up creating this hilarious moment where we're playing pool and I'm about to win. And so she whispers something crazy sexy in my ear that she's going to do to me that night. And I end up missing the shot, and I got mad.
Oh, God.
And so instead of being like, okay, now I'm going to take you up on that thing that
Yeah.
you just whispered in my ear, I was actually mad. Now I was mad because of insecurity, because I thought if she could beat me at pool that she wouldn't be attracted to me. So anyway, I was headed down unintentionally that path of, I just had wrong base assumptions about what it was that would attract a woman. And so once I began to realize, oh, wait a second, what this is, even from an evolutionary perspective, is two halves of a whole coming together, because from evolution, you need to stay alive long enough to have kids that have kids. So that means it's not enough just to get the person pregnant. And look, I am hyper aware of the fact that we fall in the middle in terms of our morphology. So we have testicles that are relatively large. We produce a large volume of semen, but not compared to some animals that truly it's just a spray and pray methodology. So we're in the middle. So I get it. There's sort of a tension there. But when I think of my wife as my equal, my partner, my other half, that we're in this to make each other better, that I have somebody with whom I can be not weak, but vulnerable, that I can share what's really going on in my life, that can do the same for me, then there is a reason, despite all of my success and wealth, that the thing I prize above everything is my marriage. Because nothing has given me more mental well-being than my marriage. And so when I hear guys talk like that, they've adopted a base assumption that there's an antagonistic relationship between men and women. Now, again, I get it. There's something happening in culture right now, which I can map out sort of my hypothesis on that. But I want to hear from you first. So I get it. But wow, does that lead you to somewhere you don't want to be?
Yeah. Well, I will start by saying I think I agree with you wholeheartedly that having a good relationship is a game changer for your life. You could not be as wealthy and successful as you are without your wife. I could not be where I am without my partner. And I think ultimately, if we didn't have supportive partners at home, yeah, you could probably get somewhere. You could still get success. You absolutely can. But the amount of joy and happiness and overall health that brings to you with having that deep emotional connection with another being is really important. So we know that loneliness is killing people. Like, people are dying because of loneliness. Like, that's one of the indicators of mortality. In fact, it's not just loneliness of having close friends. That's an important one, but it's also just having nice social interactions. So, having good, positive social interactions with people around you. And so ultimately, when you take on a viewpoint where you think that some people are not worthy or disposable, then you are setting yourself up. You may be fine. You're wealthy or young. These guys will sleep with lots of women and probably be fulfilled sexually. But in terms of having deep emotional connections with somebody, they're going to miss out on that. And then eventually everyone ages. You need those connections to help you age gracefully, to keep you healthy, keep you happy. It's a huge part of health. And my husband, I told you before we started, he worked in subacute rehabs. And he would see people close to the end of their lives, right? A lot of them were very old. And so many people would have no one come visit them. Nobody came to visit them at the end of their lives. And so, yeah, you can think whatever you want now, but 20, 30 years from now, you're going to be that person sitting alone with no one coming to visit you and dying because you're lonely. And it is so impactful. And I realize that society is changing, and I wish for the same as you, that I hope my sons find really amazing partners that will be similar to my relationship with my husband. And I think it's really sad to see this movement taking hold. And I realize it's in reaction to things that are happening in society, but it's ultimately a really toxic way of thinking.
Agreed. Why do you think this is happening?
So I think that, there's a lot of factors. So one is that we're being distanced. COVID naturally distanced us, which then made it more difficult for people to interact. But then on top of it, because of things like social media, technology, the accessibility of pornography and things like that, young people are not going out and meeting people of the opposite sex because of all these different factors.
Why does porn make them less likely to go after the opposite sex?
So think about when you were a kid. If you wanted to watch a porn or see a porn, you had to find a magazine. You had to find a VCR, get a tape. I know little kids don't know what a VCR is. You had to go to a VCR, find a tape, put it in a room where nobody was going to walk in on you and watch it, right? That was exceedingly difficult.
Yes.
And now all you got to do is turn on your phone. It is so accessible that kids as young as 8 are seeing pornography, and their brains are not fully formed. I have no problem with pornography. I think when used, it can be a great tool to enhance your pleasure and also make you feel good when used healthy. But if you're at a young age, you don't know what it is. You don't know, is this real? Is this not real? It can really release a lot of dopamine, which can then make you feel like you're seeking that again. over and over again. So I think when used inappropriately, or especially in young ages, it can be very harmful. And it can make you be like, well, why should I go approach someone of the opposite sex and deal with rejection when I can just have it right on the phone and I don't need to go through all that hassle? It's just so easy to access porn now.
My wife Lisa struggled profoundly with her gut health and experienced debilitating stomach pain. So I focused my energy on learning everything I could about the human gut. Viome is on the cutting edge of this growing area of study with their at-home gut intelligence test. Just 2 to 3 weeks after sending in your sample, you can see your results on 20 integrative health tests that measure your inflammatory activity, metabolic fitness, and the health of your gut lining. As a special offer to my viewers, Viome is offering $110 off your test. Just go to tryviome.com/impact and use code IMPACT to get the $110 off.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of the problem. Is it becomes they call it sedating behavior. So when I think about when I was a kid, I remember thinking, wait, one day I'm actually going to be inside a woman. Like that's actually going to happen. I remember I was freaking out. I would get giddy at the thought that, oh my God, one day. Mm-hmm. Now, I really worry. I don't have an addictive personality. However, if I was a kid that had access to porn the way the kids do now, I don't know. That's the one thing I feel like when I was like 13, 14, I would try to set a record for the number of times I could masturbate in a single day. Like if I had porn, like, whoa, like that one really worries me because of it. It is a hunger you have that propels you out into the world and you can satiate yourself simply by masturbating. And so if you're not going after a woman and facing rejection is hard. It's really hard. And if you aren't really hungry, if you don't really want what's on the other side of that risk, you're never going to do it. And so and look, I make video games for a living, but if you've got video games which have this incredible ability to deliver goal, accomplishment, dopamine reward, it's unbelievable. So you have that. So you have this sense of I'm making progress in my life. You have all the porn in the world, so you're seeing more attractive women nude than any man other than Genghis Khan throughout history would have seen in his entire lifetime. You can see in an afternoon of scrolling your favorite porn site. And then on top of that, you touched on this briefly, but diet. People's diets are out of whack. They're overweight, just crushing their libido down. You didn't say that, but I will. Mm-hmm. I think people, if they are eating poorly, they are not working out, their libido is gonna get hammered. Absolutely. Graham crackers were originally invented to suppress libido. That is a true story. You can go look it up.
So were Kellogg's.
Facts.
Yep.
Facts.
Cornflakes.
So yeah. So we've got that whole bolus of all this sedating behavior, which is making people not want to take the risk. And then we've got the men are bad, toxic, don't be aggressive, all that. Then you get the red pill confounding variable of no, women are the enemy. They're trying to hold you back. They're not your partner. They're not somebody to contend with. They're somebody to control, and that their pleasure is elective. That is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life.
It is horrible.
Yeah. This is bad.
It's a lot. And I think I want to make the clarification. A lot of people use pornography in a healthy way. My concern is with kids. And I, as a parent, what I've done, I will share, and what I've shared on my channel is talk to your kids about what they're going to see. I know this is an awkward conversation, but they're going to come across it whether you restrict access to the computer, whether you restrict access to a phone. They will see it from a friend. They will see it somewhere. There is no way, unless you're with them 24 hours a day, that they will not see it.
Which would be its own problem.
Yes. So in those cases, I would say talk to your kids. Say, you may see something that you may find confusing, that you may find interesting. Talk to them about what sex is and have that conversation, because if they don't hear it from you, they're going to hear it from misinformative sources. They're not hearing it at school. All they learn about at school is how to put on a condom and have consent, both, and avoid STDs. These are all important things to talk about, but they are not they're not enough. And
Table
so we
stakes.
have to have these conversations at home with our children, whether it feels awkward, whether it feels weird. You are the adult. Like, have the conversation, figure out a way that makes sense for you when they're age appropriate to have the conversation, so that when they come across pornography, because unfortunately they will, they feel comfortable to talk to you about it and to be like, oh, this is not normal. This is not what sex looks like. This is a this is a program. This is an entertainment. This is not real life. This is adult, doctored, lighted, all these things to make it look better. And so, just like, I think that's the only thing that we can do currently in the state of the way things are right now, is to protect, at least educate our children.
Yeah, to your point, I am pro pornography. I love it the most. I think it's great. I've enjoyed my fair share. What I worry about is when it gets out of control. And I do worry, admittedly, about kids looking at it so young and almost getting like a cynical attitude. Like, there is something about just the prevalence where, like, so I'm a big believer that people should have rules in their life. Now, I'm saying that as an adult with a fully formed brain. As a kid, this is probably nonsensical. But as an adult, you just say, okay, what's my goal? What is it that I want? What are the rules I need to put in place to make sure that I don't end up having a problem? And so thankfully, by the time online pornography was a thing, I was an adult and I had all those rules. And so it was like a fun thing to dip into and out of when, whatever, my wife and I weren't going to be able to have sex, or she didn't want to have sex, or whatever. But I don't even think it has to be meeting the clinical threshold for addiction for it to stop people from being in the right position. So just like there's all the food in the universe at the grocery store, and quite frankly, in my house, but I will still fast because of all of the benefits of it, I would highly encourage people to create a sexual hunger in themselves that is sufficient to get them to, because that's nature's way of propelling you forward to go find a mate who will then have all these other benefits. But certainly for guys, that's a really big thing. Like, as a kid, I didn't think one day I'll have a woman who loves me. I thought one day I will be able to have sex with a woman. Like, that was just an all-consuming thought. Like, when you were describing, I will just say, if there are any women listening to this that have kids, if you have a son and he sees pornography for the first time, it is the most all-consuming image he will have ever encountered in his life. Like, it hits you like a drug. It's like, whoa, this is exciting. And so if people develop a habit of like, oh, that's my go-to, and you're showing up for work on time, you hang out with your friends, you do things, yeah, cool. But you never hit that threshold where just the desire for
Real people.
sex, like that it propels you out into the world of risk.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think, I see a lot of people who will develop bad habits because they have now masturbated to pornography or to excess with, things like the death grip or whatever. They've gotten so used to that. They've habituated, is the term we use, to that action or that viewing, and that can't be replicated with normal sex. And so then you have to retrain your body to be aroused by your partner, or to be, or to get the same stimulation with lighter force or whatever. So I think ultimately it's really important to never do everything the same way every time, to vary it up, to make sure that you are not finding that more pleasurable than being with your partner, or seeking a partner for that matter, because that's how we're going to perpetuate society, right? Finding partners, having babies, and it's super important. And I think, like, yeah, it's a tough situation, but I think we'll ultimately, I think people will figure out rules for themselves and their kids, and it'll be okay.
Yeah, it's interesting as I see society really struggling with how do we rein this all in. It's a very interesting conversation. Now, I'm just thinking through what I'm about to say. Now I'm sort of at the beginning of this, so I don't know your thoughts on Jordan Peterson. I am very compelled by him. I find him very, very interesting. Look, he can tweet like a madman sometimes. However, I felt like he was the internet's dad, and then he got sick. And when he came back, he was very religious, and I didn't understand it. And so I'll see this happen a lot. I'm having a weird thing with Sam Harris right now, sort of same thing, where I'll see somebody really, really smart that I respect a lot, and they've helped shape my thinking. They will say something I don't understand, and I try to go form a worldview where I say, okay, for what they're saying to be true, the following things would have to be true. Anyway, I did that with Jordan. And what it seems like to me is, if Nietzsche's right, and when God dies, he said something like, we'll have so much blood on our hands, we'll never be able to wash it off. Now, he didn't mean, obviously, literally that we killed God. He means once the idea of God is no longer there, and you don't have a way to get a lump of like live life like this, people start trying all kinds of things. And I feel like we're living through an era where people are going to run these experiments on how we put the genie back in the bottle. Because when I look at the future, I see sex robots, I see AI girlfriends. And so people are going to have to make a decision. Am I going down that path? Or do I just have a rule set in my life that says I'm not? And so it will be very interesting to read Jordan's upcoming book, We Who Contend with God. I don't believe in God. And I have a feeling, though, that the reason religion has a kind of staying power that it's had is that it's a bunch of experiments that have been run that if you do these things, you will get a positive outcome. So for instance, I didn't know this, but I learned this recently. Orthodox Jews, 1 month a year, 1 week out of the month, 1 week out of the month, I think that's accurate. 1 week out of the month, oh God, I hope that's correct. They're not allowed to have sex so that they can build that desire even though they're in a committed relationship. So do you see a way for us to put this genie back in the bottle? As somebody staring at 2 young boys, what's the path to them leading a good life that the current internet age does not seem to naturally lead us to?
I mean, I'm figuring out just like every other parent, but I think in terms of what me and my husband try to model is we try to show them what a healthy relationship is and why it's so valuable to us. We do that on a regular basis, you know. We are affectionate in front of them. We tell them how much we value each other and how valuable our lives are because of each other. And we talk about it, right? Like when, I'll give you a story. So my son is in school and he has a girl who always comes up to him and hugs him without necessarily getting consent. And he's like, Mommy, she keeps hugging me and I don't know what to do. And I said, do you want her to hug you? And he said, not really. And I said, well, then just say no, right? But he feels comfortable to talk to me about those things, right? And I think it comes from a place where I've always been open with him. I've always answered to any question you have, I will answer it. Whether it makes me uncomfortable or not, I will answer it to the best of my ability. As soon as he turned like, it was 7 or 8, we started having those conversations. And I said, you know, it'll just be you and me. We don't have to have anyone else in the room. You can talk to me, because he doesn't, you know, he feels comfortable at this age to talk to me about those things. And then eventually he'll feel more comfortable talking to his dad about those things. And so I think, you know, that's what we're trying to do, to show them that like nothing can replace true human connection. And it really can't. It can make you feel good in the short term. And the AI robot sort of freaks me out a little bit, because it will be like, it'll say everything you want it to say. It'll do everything you want it to do. And so that's going to be hard. And I think we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. But nothing is sort of as exciting as the spontaneity of being with someone, because they have their own brain, their own thoughts. And, you know, you think about it, you don't always want everything to be hunky-dory. Sometimes you want to fight. Sometimes you want to have an argument or a debate with someone or feel like you're being challenged. Like, that's where I think you can't replace that with an AI. Like, that needs to be, that's sort of autonomous human brain thought power.
Let me say that in a slightly different way and tell me what you think about this. You're never going to want that. But your life will be better if you have that. And so you have to look at things where it's like what I was saying earlier with my wife and I know the greatest hits of our sex life, but we know the danger of doing it the quote unquote best way every time, because it suddenly stops being the best way. And one thing, and this is super pervasive, and I did not think this would come up. I don't know how you respond to this, but I see an attack on free speech right now that really scares me. And the reason it scares me is you need to seek disconfirming evidence. You're going to have a lot of terrible ideas. And if there are things that you're not allowed to talk about, you may never get rid of said terrible idea. And that can be at the individual level, that can be at the societal level. And so getting people to understand that the right way to think about a long-term partner is it's someone to contend with. It's someone who will not want to do things like you all the time, and you will have to compromise. And that compromise is going to be really annoying. And so it becomes a question of how do we make sure that this relationship is valuable enough that all of those compromises are going to make sense? Because if you really have an equal partner, they will make you so much better than you would have been by yourself. One of my favorite things to remind my wife of is I don't know who I would have become had I not met you, because I met her when I was 24. So legitimately, my brain didn't stop developing theoretically till I was 25. So I mean, quite literally, I don't know who I would have become, but convincing somebody who is playing video games, they have an OnlyFans account or they subscribe to OnlyFans accounts, they get that a simulacrum of sex all the time, they're smoking weed, they're drinking, they're having fun. And so they, again, going back to it's sedating behavior, they just never have the threshold met to make them go do the uncomfortable thing.
I mean, think about, when you say this, I think about like when you've been in a relationship or had a friend, or it could be a romantic or unromantic, and everything's been fine. It's been nice, right? Use the word nice. It's been nice. It's been really great. There's been no conflict. Things have been fine, but you're just not settled. You feel like something's not right. Like I've heard that many times from my female friends. I've felt that myself. And you're like, you know what? It's just, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not that great. And that's what I think we have to rely on human behavior in terms of like, that's what AI is going to be. It's going to be real nice. It's going to be real nice. But at some point you're going to be like, it's okay. Like it's not, there's something unsettling about it. And I'm sure there's a neurological reason or neuroscience reason behind that. But I think that that's hopefully a deep need that we have as humans to have some sort of, whether we believe it or not, some sort of challenge in our lives that we have to overcome. Because think about it, you take a day off and you watch Netflix for the whole day, like it's whatever, maybe that's something you wanted to do or not, and maybe you enjoyed that day, but you can't do 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 days of it, right? You're going to be like, okay, I need to do something with purpose and have something that's bringing me closer to a goal, right? And so I think with the AI, like you said, when you build things, you need them to give you a goal. And so, yeah, maybe AI will give you a goal, but probably not early on. Like, what's the goal? Like, are you going to play hard to get with your AI robot? That's not why you got the robot, right? So, like, I don't know.
You bring up something that's really interesting, which is that everything can be nice, but there's something missing. It was the one thing in my story of how I think people should approach that first sexual encounter that doesn't, like, everything holds up, even over a long-term relationship, except for there does come a point where, again, I'm assuming consent. This is two people that want to be together. But it can be hot to be a little surprising, to catch somebody off guard, to do something they weren't expecting. How do you keep sex from getting boring?
Yes. So again, this is with consent and everything. Novelty is super important. And just like anything else, novelty is what keeps it spicy, particularly in long-term relationships. So what I tell people who are in long-term relationships is to like write down your kinky thoughts and whatever you're into, like whatever you've never tried but you want to do. And don't feel like that, you don't have to share this if you don't want to, but just write it down for yourself and have your partner do the same thing. And then slowly you can sort of share these things and maybe start incorporating them. Because in a long-term relationship, that's sort of a cool thing. When you're just getting to know someone, it's a little bit hard to know what's okay and what's not. So you have to tread that a little carefully because it may not be consensual because you don't know them well enough to make sure that it is if you're just surprising them. And so, or you can, there's ways to do it that I think would work. But ultimately, I think really the key is to just like, to be open to new experiences. Like, yeah, and realizing that not every sexual encounter will be mind-blowing. Sometimes you will have mediocre sex, and that's okay. But you want to keep it fresh, you want to keep it interesting, and so try different things. And you can do it in different locations. It can be as simple as moving from one room to the other. It doesn't have to be like going out and buying handcuffs and all this sort of stuff. It can be very simple, but enough that it changes something about the encounter.
As you think about trying to do things that your partner would be into, but that is going to be a little bit surprising to them, how do you think about introducing that? Is it always going to be communicating ahead of time, or is it going to be trying something in the moment that you've never talked about?
I think you have to know your partner. I think if you're in a safe, secure, committed relationship, it's probably fine to surprise them in the moment, but you know your partner. And it may be like you don't have to talk about it, but you can just like put something new on the bed and be like, hey, like, we're going to try this. And if their reaction is like, oh no, then you're just going to stop, right? But sometimes you need to talk about it, right? Like if you're doing anal penetration for the first time, you have to prepare, you have to talk about it, you have to use the right kind of lubricant. There's a whole process, right? So certain things you have to talk about beforehand.
Speaking of anal sex, why is that a thing? And then what are reasons why a woman might actually consider it?
So in terms of why is it a thing? Well, one, it's sort of like a forbidden area. Like it's something that when you look at studies about anal sex, there's not many, but the one thing is like it's sort of exciting and new and something that you're saving for that partner or doing with that partner, and that could be really exciting. Two, it's safe in terms of like you're not going to get pregnant. You can still get STDs, but like a lot of times for women, the big concern is getting pregnant. So
is
that's
splash contraception a real thing?
You want to use contraception. The penis owner should use contraception because you can still get STDs, because it's such a friable area that bleeding of those tissues, it's a thin area. And so bleeding of those anal tissues is more common and can cause STDs. So you should use a condom when you're having anal sex, unless you've both been tested and you're very sure that there's no risk of STDs. And so that's there. And then, I think in some cases, it's sort of like, again, I think it's more like the taboo thing. People, and then it's also like a gift they feel like they're giving to their partner. So sometimes their partner wants to try it and it's like a gift they're giving to them. And it's just a different area of stimulation, right? You're ultimately, there's lots of nerve endings around the inner third of the vagina. And so the back end of the vagina has those nerve endings too. So when you're stimulating the rectum, you're going to stimulate those nerve endings as well. And in men, you can stimulate the prostate, which has a lot of nerve endings as well. So there's, there is pleasurable nerves there that can be enjoyable. Will you orgasm from anal sex? Less likely, but it can still be pleasurable.
So some people do orgasm from that? That's
I think if you are, you can orgasm from like nipple stimulation. You can orgasm from all sorts of things. If you are really, really focused on that sensation of pleasure, you can, some people can train themselves or can get so turned on that they orgasm from something like that. Now, it's not everybody, and it's not certainly mandatory. But I think, I would say that the more purpose is like, if you enjoy it, you can find pleasure from it because of those nerve endings, and that's really the goal. Like the goal is not always to orgasm, right? It's really to enjoy the pleasure, and so that's really the purpose of that.
The goal isn't always to orgasm. I will be honest. The small handful of times that I have had sex and not orgasmed have been lame. Like it feels like a failure.
Well, part of that, yes, evolutionarily, right, the goal is to orgasm. But I think if we look at sex in a way where we're enjoying the journey and not just the destination, it can transform the way we think about sex, right? Because if you're enjoying the journey, you're more likely than not going to orgasm. But I think sometimes, stuff happens, right? You had too much to drink, you took a medication, whatever it is, and you're not going to climax. But that doesn't mean that you didn't enjoy it. It doesn't mean that you weren't turned on. But it can be a huge letdown that you didn't reach climax. And that's unfortunate, but that doesn't mean that like that should be the only thing we're focused on, right? Because I think then you miss that whole part of like, oh, this feels good. Like this is still nice. It still feels intimate. It still feels great. That I still feel pleasure. It may just not be that like mind-blowing ending to it, which is a nice bonus, but not necessary, I think, for every single time.
Do you think men and women view that differently?
I think that men don't have to deal with it as often. So I think that's why it's different, because as you said earlier, there's an orgasm gap, right? Women are more likely not to orgasm than men in general. And so I think it's partially evolutionary, right? You want to orgasm because you want to ejaculate and you want to spread your seed. And then, so there's more of a desire to do that just biologically. And then, I think also there's it's always been pretty easy. So like you pretty much always do it. So when you don't, it's a huge mind letdown too, on top of it all.
What are some big misconceptions that men have about women that they would be surprised? So I'm queuing off of when my wife and I first got together, it was really hit or miss whether I could make her orgasm or not. And it took a ton of effort. And so there were times where it was like, we just didn't have time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that she was still enjoying it. So I'm like, is this just for me? Because that makes me feel uncomfortable. And she was like, no, not at all. Like, it's still fun. I love feeling close to you. So what are some things that guys get wrong about women?
So the number one thing is how long it takes women to orgasm. So like I said, men average penetrative length is about 5 to 6 minutes. Women, it's about 14 minutes. So if you don't start pleasuring your partner, your female partner first, it's unlikely she's going to orgasm because she needs more stimulation than the average male. Again, we're talking averages here. Some women will obviously climax sooner, but for the general population, you would say average, it takes longer. So you may say like, oh man, I always come and she doesn't, but it may be that like there's just not enough time. There's not enough dedicated stimulation to her. And again, it doesn't, if you are like tired or exhausted, bringing in toys doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't make you less desirable. It just makes you focused on her pleasure, which is great.
All right. Any other things that on average guys get wrong?
What else? I think the big one, we've touched on a few, right? One is like knowing that the clitoris is the primary route of pleasure. And the other one is knowing that like the size is not all. That's not the most important thing for women. Yes, we've been conditioned to talk about it. We've talked about all those reasons, but I think ultimately, like if you have an average size or even below average penis, that doesn't mean that you can't pleasure women and that you cannot be very desirable for your abilities to pleasure women.
Here's an interesting stat that I found mind-blowing. They used computer-generated images of men, and they showed them to women and asked them to rate them on attractiveness. They were nude. And they found that a tall man, you could increase his attractiveness by adding as little as a ½ inch to the penis, and his score would go up. But to get the same score increase on a short guy, you had to double the size of the penis.
Double.
Yeah. So
Jeez.
Now what I took away from that is that height's the thing far more than penis size, which I don't know if I'm more or less terrified by.
Well, neither of them can you control, right? So I think partially it's really frustrating. I think when you think about what women desire, when you talk to women in general, they want a 6-figure man, a 6-inch dick, a 6-figure salary, and that's like a very small subset of the population, right? And so I think ultimately what you want and what you get are two different things. But yes, height is part of that. For whatever reason, probably evolutionarily, women tend to be gravitated towards taller men. But again, none of those things can you control. So you can only control the things that you know how, which can be how well you pleasure a woman, right?
All right. So to pleasure the woman, though, you have to, let's just put them at a bar, or to make it less cliche, they're at a charity event, whatever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You got to get past the obvious, you're short. What's your advice to short guys?
So I'm not a relationship expert, but I will say humor works quite well. So if you are funny, or charming, funny, but I think humor works very, very well in breaking the ice. And so it's a learned skill. You don't have to be born funny. You can learn to be funny. And I think that helps quite a bit.
What do guys have the most anxiety about? So your YouTube channel, you must hear from people left, right, and center. I know you have a predominantly male audience. What are they most anxious about?
I mean, we've talked about all the big ones are penis size. That's the big
So that
one, and
comes
then
up all
that
the
comes
time.
up all the time. Pleasuring women, and like, are their hormones okay? Like, is their testosterone okay? Those are sort of the biggest things.
What are they worried about with their testosterone?
Well, how can they boost it? What can they do? What can they do naturally? Is testosterone replacement safe? That sort of stuff.
Why are they worried about that?
Well, I think as you probably already know, I think you've alluded to on some of your older podcasts, but testosterone levels are going down in the nation in general. And we know that testosterone decreases with age, but now the number of people we're seeing with low testosterone is more and more. Now, whether that's because we're getting better at reporting these things or because we're doing better studies, I think unlikely. I think it's there is truly a decline in testosterone due to changes in health, which we've talked about, having poor diet, not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, and then doing other activities like drugs and marijuana and smoking. Those things can all negatively impact your testosterone, including being exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals, which are unfortunately quite predominant nowadays. And so I think all of those things together are causing a decline in testosterone, and it's causing a lot of symptoms. Testosterone is a very important hormone. It increases, it's often linked with desire, but it's also great for muscle mass. It's great for cognitive function. It's great for decreasing fat cells. And also now there's more and more data showing that it's actually beneficial for cardiovascular health. So lots of things that testosterone is valuable for, and it going down is concerning.
Do you know what's triggering that? Is it, are these guys that can't grow a beard? Are they, the internet tells them that they're a bigger man if they have more testosterone? Like I've had my testosterone levels checked multiple times, but honestly, I don't even remember what the levels are, because whatever the testosterone insecurity trigger is, I don't encounter it.
Yeah.
So,
it's symptoms. I mean, so I don't know why I think they're just seeing, there's so much stuff on social media about like, why you need more testosterone. And so I think people are now like, oh, do I need more testosterone? Like, it's more of a curiosity. I don't think everyone has symptoms of low testosterone, but certainly when you have symptoms like your brain fog, you're feeling more fatigued than usual, you're having less desire, maybe you're having issues with erections, maybe you're going to the gym and doing the same routine you were 10 years ago and you're not gaining muscle, like those sorts of things are clear. And depression is another one. So those are
does
sort of
testosterone impact that?
So testosterone can improve mood. And in fact, there's good studies that show people who are low hypogonadal with symptoms and have depression actually improve their mood with testosterone replacement. So ultimately, if you are in that category, I think it's absolutely valuable to get your testosterone checked and consider natural ways to boost it or replacing testosterone.
Okay, before we talk about how you can naturally boost it, you started touching on this at the end of that. My running hypothesis around why guys would be anxious about it is they assume that if they have higher testosterone levels that they'll get jacked, not thinking about just how brutally you have to work out, that, hey, I'm going to get jacked. I actually don't know the answer to this question, but I don't think there's a big relationship. They probably are getting obese. Their erections are getting worse, and they think, if I raise my testosterone levels, I'll get better erections.
Yes. Yes.
Is that
absolutely
true?
So when you're obese, right, you're probably developing some sort of metabolic syndrome, whether it's high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and that will then negatively affect your erections. So testosterone may help a little bit, right, because there is a hormonal impact if your testosterone is truly low. If it's not low, it's not going to help. So if it's truly low, whether it's your total testosterone, your free testosterone, if it's truly low, then boosting it may help your erections, but it is not a fountain of youth, and it's not going to restore everything back to the way it was 100%. I will say the number one thing that patients come back and tell me what they notice the most is that their brain fog is better. They're like, oh, I feel clearer. That's like actually the first thing they notice.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's very interesting. You were saying it's not a fountain of youth. What is, in terms of lifestyle, what is the fountain of youth? I know there's nothing that's probably going to move you backwards, but I'm sure you have a lifestyle that you would prescribe to people and say, look, do this. If you want to have good libido, great erections, yada, yada, do the following.
Yeah. So first thing is get good sleep. Sleep is extremely powerful. It's been shown in multiple studies when you're getting more than 7 hours of good quality sleep. And quality is the important thing, right? If you're drinking a ton of caffeine or alcohol before bed, the quality of your sleep, even if you're getting 7 hours, is not going to be great. So sort of optimizing your sleep as best possible. And that would include like making sure you have some sort of bedtime routine so that your body knows it's time to sleep, trying to avoid blue lights before bed, so trying not to scroll your phone or looking at a computer. I'm guilty, I still do it, but I think that's the goal. And then trying to then get that good at least 7 hours of quality sleep has been shown to boost testosterone. And in the same way, testosterone follows our circadian rhythm. So trying to another thing that will improve your quality of sleep is like seeing daylight in the morning and then before bed, seeing it again at dusk, so that you can sort of tell your brain starts figuring out like, okay, it's getting time to go to bed, and your body can start doing all the necessary physiologic changes.
Do you have to be outside, or can you get it through the window?
It should be outside, ideally. But the window is, if you can't do it, look out the window at least. So that's one. Two, in terms of diet, the best studied diet is the Mediterranean diet. Now, that's not to say there's not other diets that have been studied. They've looked at the ketogenic diet. They've looked at other things. But in terms of the best study, when it's Mediterranean. And so what I tell people is, you may find different things that work for you, but avoiding processed foods, getting more plants and vegetables, trying to have healthy fats, because actually when you go too low fat of a diet, you will actually drop your testosterone. So making sure you're getting good healthy fats, olive oil, avocado, nuts, those sorts of things are important for testosterone. And then in terms of exercise, the thing that boosts testosterone is really resistance training of the large muscle groups. So like lower extremity, large muscle groups, so squats, deadlifts, those sorts of things are going to help you boost your testosterone. Now, they're not going to boost it, like you're not going to work out once, it's going to be boosted forever. It's like a constant ongoing, you keep doing resistance training with your exercise and it will help. Now, if you're doing really extensive endurance training, like ultra marathons, you may actually find your testosterone dropping, because testosterone is working the opposite of cortisol. So when cortisol goes up, which is a stress hormone, your testosterone goes down. So you want to sort of avoid high stress, constant stress over long periods of time will reduce your testosterone. And then the last thing is endocrine disrupting chemicals. So what I tell people is we can only control so much. There's plastics everywhere, but try to drink out of non-plastic water bottles. Try to not warm up your food in plastic. And those are simple changes you can make to sort of try to limit at least the majority of your plastic consumption through those sorts of things.
What's your take on Teflon frying pans?
I think that the more and more we know, we don't use Teflon. So for those reasons, I think I'm not an expert in that area, but I would say try to use like alternative options.
What do you use?
My husband buys all the cookware, but I know we threw away all our Teflon pans.
Yeah, we did a similar thing. We're now using ceramic.
I think we're also using ceramic. Yeah, it's hard to take care of those, but they're,
yes.
Yeah, it's really
when they're brand new, like everything just comes right off, and then like a couple weeks in, it starts to get real difficult.
Yeah, so I think there's a trick to managing them. I'm sure there's a YouTube video on how to do that better.
I am sure you're right about that. Okay, do you know who Brian Johnson is?
Yes.
What do you think about his quest for the 18-year-old erection?
Yeah, so I don't know enough about all that he's doing. I know he did shockwave therapy, and I can speak on that.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, so shockwave therapy is, we've been using shockwaves in medicine for a long time. And so shockwaves we use in urology for kidney stones. So we'll shockwave small kidney stones to get them to break into tiny pieces so you can pee them out. And they've started doing studies on shockwave for erectile dysfunction probably over a decade ago. So we have lots of data, but the issue with the data is that it didn't follow one specific protocol. It didn't use one specific machine. And so that's why we can't find consensus on whether this is, at least from the society view, whether this is good or bad. Now, if you look at the sum totality of the data, shockwave, essentially how it works is you do shock waves on the penis at different parts of the penis.
Is this like radio waves? What are we shocking with?
You're shocking with what is the technology? Piezoelectric. There's like different types of shock waves essentially that we're using. So essentially you're shocking, you're delivering these shocks that are at a depth of penetration so they're getting to the erectile tissue. So this is focused shock waves.
Does it feel like electricity?
No, it feels like if you were to feel it when you do kidney stones, so you shouldn't feel it when you do penis shockwave because it's a little bit different. But with the shock waves on the kidney, we tell them it's like someone's like punching you in the back.
Fun.
Like, but you're asleep for those. So for these, it's at the depth of penetration where it's just getting the erectile tissue. And so what happens is it creates this little mechanical trauma. Your body then releases a whole bunch of growth factors to heal that area, including vascular endothelial growth factor, which then leads to new blood vessel formation. So this is one of the few things that we have in our arsenal that causes regenerative treatment for erectile dysfunction. I mean, we're trying to fix the problem, which is blood flow, by doing shockwave. And so based on the totality of the data, what we see is that typically people will do one shockwave treatment every 6 weeks, every week for 6 weeks. And then that's basically what all the studies have shown. That's it. Now, there are some maintenance protocols that haven't been well studied yet or haven't been published yet. But essentially, after those 6 weeks, we're seeing like 70 to 80% success. And then after 1 year, it goes down to 50%. So likely what that means is that you need some sort of maintenance, right? Like you can't just do 6 weeks and be done. You probably need to do some maintenance, and probably there's other factors that are causing ED as you age and other things. So, so based on that, I would say it's currently not approved for erectile dysfunction in terms of the societies in the U.S. In the European Society actually approves it for vascular erectile dysfunction. So, based on that, I would say I think it is safe. It's definitely safe. Maybe you might get some bruising, but overall it's very, very safe. And, but it's costly because insurance doesn't cover it. And so if you have the disposable income and you want to try it, I think knowing that this is what the data shows, I think it's not going to harm you. And it may benefit you, especially with maintenance protocols. We're seeing pretty reasonable results.
And what are reasonable results? Just
meaning that you're
firmness?
Sustaining, yeah, you're getting increased erectile function. So these are people who are having maybe mild to moderate ED. Once you get to severe ED, you're not going to see a difference. So if you're like not getting an erection at all, or it's very difficult to get one, it may be difficult. And there's a questionnaire that we use. It's called the SHIM questionnaire, and you can actually score yourself to find out mild, moderate, and severe. And so it's not really recommended for severe ED. It's really only recommended for ED that's vascular in nature, so meaning it's a blood flow problem. And so that's really the main problem. Not if you've had a prostate surgery, not if you have a nerve problem, but really for the arterial blood flow problem.
Why does a prostatectomy cause problems?
So the prostate is in a location where there's a lot of things around it. So it's around the urethra. It also has nerves on the lateral aspect of the prostate that we try our best to spare when we can. When the prostate cancer.
Where are those nerves going to?
They're going to the penis and to the urethral sphincter. And so these nerves are they're the cavernous nerves, and they sort of like the neurovascular bundles that are right alongside the prostate. And so we reflect those when we do surgery to try and spare those when you have localized prostate cancer. Now,
can I ask? Sorry.
Yes.
The nerves run from the prostate to the penis? Is that to coordinate ejaculation? Like, why would those two have nerves? So they can communicate, presumably.
Well, so when you think about the nervous system, you're getting nerves that are coming like in these sort of like areas. I'm trying to think of the word. Why is it escaping me right now? You're basically getting areas of nerves from the spinal cord that will then go off and do a whole bunch of, so these are bundles of nerves that will then go off and stimulate a whole, or innervate a whole bunch of different areas, including the penis. And so if you accidentally cut those nerves or burn those nerves during prostatectomy for cancer, then you will notice that you will not be able to get erections anymore. And so that's why when you talk about prostate cancer and surgery, there's sort of a whole host of options, not just surgery, but there's a whole bunch of options that you can talk about and assess, because it really depends on quality of life versus how aggressive the cancer is and all those sorts of things. So it's sort of a complex decision to make. But ultimately, if you have injury to those nerves, you will then have difficulty getting erections. And so this shockwave is not going to work for those patients, at least not yet that we know of.
Okay, just a little bit more on this bundle of nerves. I've always been curious about this. Is that the only bundle of nerves that innervates the penis, and it just happens to be by the prostate and be at risk, or does it create communication between the prostate and the penis?
It's not between the prostate and the penis. It's between the spinal cord and the penis.
Got it. And they just happen to be by the prostate. So when you take it out, you just have this high risk of bumping into something.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if shockwave therapy is not yet approved in the US, what is our go-to for somebody? And so is that the only part of Brian Johnson's protocol that you know? I don't know.
I think he's doing he may be doing some PRP injections or stem cells. I don't know. Those are
stem cells.
Those are two of the also regenerative therapies, but they're very nascent in terms of the data. I have not yet been convinced in terms of their because we still don't know. Again, PRP is an interesting thing because it is not regulated in terms of you don't need approval to offer PRP because it's a blood product. So you're basically taking your own blood and you're spinning it down to just get the platelet-rich plasma part of your blood and then injecting it back into yourself. And so that's why people are using a lot of it.
Okay, time out.
Mm-hmm.
So he is presumably,
I don't know
if he's doing PRP.
I don't know if he is.
So anyone doing PRP, let's set Brian Johnson aside. Anyone doing PRP is taking their own blood and injecting it back into the penis?
So yeah, they're basically we take the blood. Well, I don't particularly do it in my office, but we take the blood, you put it in a centrifuge, you spin it down, you basically take off the platelet-rich part of the blood, you remove the rest, and then you inject that in areas. So people are using it for all sorts of things. Hair loss has pretty good data. People are doing it for cosmetic purposes, but they're also doing it for ED. And there is some positive data. I'm not gonna say there's not any. There's some positive data, but again, you can't really measure how much platelet. You would have to do a lot of investigation to be okay, how much platelet per ml or per, is in this particular person's PRP, and then measure that and then see if they're getting enough, and is that then going on to give them the results that you want. And so the most recent study was a randomized controlled trial last year at the American Urological Association. It did not show benefit for erectile dysfunction, but that again was sort of criticized because they didn't do all these measurements of exactly how much platelet they were spinning down and blah, 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 and how often. And so I think ultimately based on that, I have not offered it yet. And I think there may be benefit, but it's certainly not as strong as the data we have for shockwave. And stem cell is even less. We have very little data on stem cells at this point for ED, but it's certainly ongoing in terms of investigations.
Okay. I don't understand platelets at all. So while definitely not a medical professional, I have a sort of working understanding of stem cells and why they might work. What are platelets? What's the purported mechanism of action?
So it's similar in terms of you are injecting this, it's creating a response, even though it's your own blood, it's creating more growth factors and things again to bring more growth of blood vessels and things like that. So that's theoretically how it works in terms of at a very basic level. But ultimately, that's what the purported mechanism is.
Okay. So stem cells. Look into the future, educate a guess. Obviously, you don't know. You're waiting for the data like everybody else. But would you expect stem cells to be effective?
It's interesting. So where I've seen stem cells do a lot of investigation in my field also is for stress incontinence for women, and so far the data has been moderate, not great. And so that's muscle derived stem cells. They're actually taking a biopsy of muscle and then injecting it into the urethra. And so far the data is not to then bulk up the urethra to prevent leakage. But so far the data is not to the point where I'm like, oh, convinced that we should be offering this yet. Now it's still evolving, and same thing with stem cells. So I don't know yet. I think that it's a toss-up, to be honest, because it sounds great in theory, but like, how much do you really need? Like in for the whole amount of the surface area of erectile tissue? Like, I don't know. So I think it's still really hard to make a projection.
Any medication that you take daily makes me a little nervous. Now, I actually was thinking about this morning, and I should say every time I say that, if your doctor has prescribed something and it is necessary for your health, obviously. But if there's something that you can do from a lifestyle perspective, probably always better to avoid a pill that you take every day, just because the law of history is the law of unintended consequences. There's probably some downstream effect. While I wouldn't characterize myself as balding, my hair has gotten thinner over time. And obviously I'm aware that I could take something and theoretically it would make my hair thicker again. But that terrifies me. I've also, in researching for this episode, came across, oh God, I wrote it down.
Finasteride.
Yes. Yeah. Post-finasteride syndrome. Talk to me about that. That scares me.
It is scary. And so finasteride is a medication that you can get in 2 doses. One is a low
This
dose.
is for hair loss, right?
So it's one in the lower doses for hair loss, and then the higher dose we use for enlarged prostate. And it basically shrinks the prostate. But it's a DHT blocker, right? So it blocks the conversion of testosterone to DHT. And but
is that dihydrotestosterone?
Correct. Yes.
Got it.
Sorry, I didn't clarify. So ultimately, in terms of what this does, in some men, it causes really significant decrease in desire that is persistent for some time. Now, the exact amount of time we don't know, but there's a small subset of men who have a very strong change in sexual symptoms right after starting finasteride. And so I actually will almost never prescribe it unless someone is like, I want to avoid surgery at all costs, and their prostate is very, very big and there's nothing else is working, then maybe. But for the most part, because of this small subset of patients, I take care of sexual health, I'm very cautious. Now, it's a very small subset of patients, so the large majority of people who take it won't have these issues. They won't have sexual side effects. They'll be just fine in every other way, similar to oral contraceptives. The majority of women will be fine, but there's a small subset of women who take oral contraceptives who will notice a significant drop in libido, because it increases your sex hormone binding globulin, which then makes less testosterone available to your body. And so those 2 medications are probably the ones that I worry about because they're so ubiquitously used, and then people can develop low libido, and they won't necessarily correlate the 2, meaning I started this medication because I wasn't thinking it was going to affect my libido, that it did.
That's worrisome. How persistent is the problem?
Well, so interestingly, when you look at the data, it's a really small number of people. But if you go on like Reddit forums or other public forums, we're seeing more people complaining of it. And it's so variable depending on how long you took it. I mean, some people it goes away in 3 months, 6 months. Some people it's a little longer. We just don't know enough yet to know exactly. But essentially, like when I see a patient with this issue, it's sort of like supporting them through that difficult time and getting them through it with other means if necessary to improve their libido, because it can be, as you can imagine, very traumatic for them.
Yeah, this is when you were talking about testosterone, and I don't know that this is actually the effect, but I have a friend that did TRT at one point. I can't remember if they were trying to have a pregnancy or something. Anyway, I don't remember why he did it. But what he described is it brought that sexual hunger back for him. And I remember, so I'm about to turn 48. But I remember my 20s. when my wife and I would go on vacation, she's like, hey, what do you want to do while we're here? It literally did not matter where we were. My answer was always, I just want to have sex twice a day. And as long as I could have sex twice a day, I was amazing. I'm happy. Yay. I don't need to go to museums. I don't need to lay on the beach. Just that was my thing. Now on vacation, once a day is amazing. But if we miss a day, no big deal. And so that level of intense hunger for sex is awesome. And I won't lie, like I do, even though I still have what I would consider certainly a normal or maybe even above normal libido for my age, there's something fascinating. There's something deeply pleasurable about being in the grips of that hunger. Does testosterone actually bring that back? And do you think, given that if I'm right about the literature, people with post-finasteride syndrome, they have an increased likelihood of suicide?
So to answer your second part of the question, yes, they do, because it can be very traumatic. As I mentioned, it's, again, not highly reported, but any sort of dramatic change in your sex life can be extremely problematic psychologically. Extremely.
For men or for men and women?
Both. But I think the one thing we see in women that's more likely to cause suicide is actually when you have persistent genital arousal syndrome or disease, PGAD it's called, and it sounds
awesome.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Imagine feeling like that all the time and
what happens?
And no matter what you do, no matter masturbate, orgasm, it doesn't go away. And so they feel miserable.
They just feel aroused, like at the level of their genitals.
Correct.
So, like they feel flush, or they feel like I really want to have sex.
It's just like feeling that uncomfortable feeling. Think about like blue balls, like that uncomfortable feeling of like feeling full and feeling, and everyone describes it a little differently. And they actually have a hard time describing it because they're like, what is this? Like, what's going on with me? Like, it's not normal to feel this way all the time, right? So they don't describe it as arousal, but essentially when you deep down, like that's exactly what's happening is they're feeling this persistent genital arousal. So that in women more likely leads to suicide.
Wow, that's terrifying.
It's really sad. So when these patients come to us, we are like, we got to get you, we got to keep an eye on you, make sure you get the treatment you need. Very often pelvic floor physical therapy can help. And so, because it's really a part of it is that pelvic floor tension is really, really tight. And that's what's causing the discomfort because it's mimicking arousal. And so that's usually the first line, but there's other sort of things you can do. And then the first part of your question, in terms of that sexual desire, does it always come back? So with TRT, yes, sometimes it does, but desire is very complex. So the goal, obviously, is if you're coming in for low libido or low desire, that we replace the testosterone your desire should come back. And now there's different types of TRT. So sometimes your testosterone number will look fine, but maybe it's not as effective. Like sometimes the gels are, like, depending on how well it's absorbed, may or may not be. If you're taking off-label medications, sometimes they don't do the same thing. And so it's variable, but essentially trying to figure out, like, it's sort of tinkering to figure out what works for you individually to help you get that desire back. But desire is very multifactorial. So there's other factors that play into it, like stress, anxiety, relationship issues are a big one, right? If you're fighting with your partner all the time, certainly your desire is going to go down. And then, other conditions or other medications can affect desire. So making sure we're optimizing all of that is really the most important thing, because I can get your testosterone to a number, but does it matter? Like if you're at 500 and your testosterone receptors are fully saturated at 500 and I get you to 900, it's not going to make a difference. We're not going to move the needle. And I don't know what number it is that your testosterone receptors are fully saturated at, but at some point, like it's the law of diminishing returns, we might actually harm you with giving you excess testosterone when you don't need it. The goal is always when you start something like TRT to make sure you're getting the intended benefit. And if not, let's move things around. Let's switch things up because we want to make sure we're optimizing for you as an individual.
It's really interesting. Okay, so the post-finasteride syndrome, a lack of sexual desire leading men to commit suicide at a higher rate, obviously not a guarantee. that makes me think of something that also when you said if you're arguing with your partner all the time. So when I think about male and female desire, communicating with my wife, helping her understand me and me trying to come to understand her, I have a quick rule of thumb. It's obviously very complicated, but for a man, if you make him feel powerful, you're pretty much done. Like you've done it. Like everything that he basically needs. There's a great quote. Oh, this is going to get me in trouble, but I can't remember who said it. Maybe Oscar Wilde. Everything is about sex except sex. That's about power. And they're obviously, given what you and I have already talked about, love, respect, trust, vulnerability, that quote isn't literally true, but there is something to, I think that part of the reason that men are obsessed with the size of their penis, part of the reason that men are just destroyed when they lose sexual desire, part of the reason that if they have erectile dysfunction, that what may start out as a physiological problem very quickly becomes a psychological problem, confounding it, is, and I really think, I know I said this at the beginning, I think that things become a thing in society because they are evolutionarily true. For a man, it's possible there's just an evolutionary algorithm running that I have not thought through well enough to know why it would be there, but you so associate your penis with your masculinity. And I remember one time with my wife, I've said this before, I'm not embarrassed by this at all, but we were having sex and we lived in an apartment. We were so broke at the time. And the neighbor upstairs had a really phlegmy cough and he just started fucking hacking up a lung. And we were having this really spontaneous moment on the living room floor. And I just lost my erection because it was so gross and there was no sound. We weren't playing music, nothing. And so it's just like, oh God. And so that it feels like your manhood is dying on the vine. And so all of that like sense of being a man and being powerful is echoed in your penis. It's crazy. And if something is going wrong, or if you're just insecure about it, like this is why yesterday when I said to the team, hey, I think penis enlargement is actually real, I can't believe this, you could hear a pin drop, except for the jokes. Of course, everybody starts making the uncomfortable jokes, but everybody was locked in. Everybody was paying attention. And it is, there is something that can't be denied about that.
100%. I mean, I think when you talk to, I've talked to many people, and over the years, people like, you spend your whole young years defining as a boy and a young man is like all around how you're going to get your partner or get a partner. It may not be your partner, but like you decide where you're going to hang out. You decide what clothes you're going to wear. You decide where you might go to college. You might decide even what kind of career you get because of, chasing a certain partner to get them to notice you or to get partners to notice you. And it is very ingrained in people's lives. And I see men every day who have issues with erections, and I know how it breaks them. I know how upset they are and how much it derails them. And the hard part is that we say women suffer in silence, but so do men. Like they will go online, they'll buy a gas station pill, they'll do a lot of other stuff before they finally come to the doctor because they're freaked out, right? And so they'll get taken advantage of by a lot of online clinics or other things. And I'm glad there's online clinics because it allows accessibility for people who won't see a doctor, but sometimes they're charging so much that you're like, well, you could get the same thing from a pharmacy with a coupon for like $20, And so it's sort of like, it's really important. And I think that if any men are listening, like you're worth taking care of yourself and like seeing a doctor and getting evaluated and getting like, you're not alone. If half of men over 50 are suffering, you are not alone. And I know it sucks, but like you can get better.
Yeah, you can get better. And I think understanding that dynamic of, okay, guys want to feel powerful for better or worse, the locus the locus of power is definitely in your mind. It isn't your penis, but it very much, you have a relationship to that. Do you know who Andrew Schultz is?
Mm-mm.
He's a comedian. He's very funny. He had a joke that I was like, that is way too true. And he said, ladies, if you really want to say something sexy to a man, you only need one word. And that word is ouch. And I almost pissed my pants with laughter. I thought that is a little too true.
Yeah.
Like just that sense of like, ooh, yeah, I'm big and powerful. Like it's just all tied up in a knot. And even going back to testosterone, I have a huge hunch that part of it is just guys think if I have high T, I'll be jacked.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting your physique in a place where you feel strong, you look strong, both of those I think are part of the equation. Your penis is where you want it to be. You get as hard as you want to be. You have that hunger. And so when I look at modern life, it's a big part of what I think is going wrong. You touched on phthalates, by another name, microplastics. I don't know what the truth is there, but I am terrified that that's causing part of the lowering of testosterone, which then has this just incredible knock-on effect, because I have a hypothesis that the effects in utero are going to be the biggest effects. And so if you're, and I know women are so sensitive to this, but if your mother is taking in phthalates or whatever, because I don't have data on this, but taking in any sort of toxins during pregnancy, and moms, it's not your fault. Like, this is modern life. This is where we're at. But, and that lowers your testosterone or whatever naturally down the line, you just spiral. Because if you still have that algorithm running in your mind that feeling powerful is like one of the most important things, and there's things just, you're being assaulted in every angle, you can really get into trouble. And so this is one of the things that I say to women. One, you want to, it has to be real. You can't fake it, but you want to help your man feel powerful. And guys, you want to earn that feeling of power, and failing to do that is brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the testosterone plummeting also, and I know like many of your audience is probably very fit and eats well, but I would say that the large majority of the population is obese and overweight.
Yes.
And they're not exercising, and they want a quick fix, and they're not eating right. And like, you got to do the hard work. You have to do the hard work to change your diet and exercise. And if that doesn't work, absolutely, there are definitely plenty of healthy people who are fit and physically fit, eating right, doing all the right things, whose testosterone still isn't as high as it should be. And that's okay. Like, then we can fix it. Then we don't feel like we're fixing something, but then like you're going 10 steps back and we're going 2 steps forward. Like, I think you got to do that work first, and you'll actually notice your penis will get bigger too, because your fat will get less. And then when you look down, you're seeing more of your penis. So you want to get a longer penis, lose the weight.
That's so true. I'm going to say something. I don't know if you're going to hate this or not,
Okay.
but if you are experiencing erectile dysfunction, odds are that is a blood flow problem, which, by the way, is a signifier, as you said, of potential heart disease. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. Go straight to getting your body fat percentage to 10%. I don't know that you need to push it much below that, but if you haven't done that, you have not done what, in my non-medical opinion, is the single most obvious thing that you could do. And then on your path to doing that, which, by the way, I only encourage people to do it in a healthy manner. You need to be eating well. Otherwise, you'll just end up being skinny fat. But if you do that and you are pushing yourself in the gym in a sensible way, because to your point, you can actually exercise so much that your testosterone actually moves in the opposite direction. But I would say that's going to be a narrow band of humanity. The vast majority of people will stop long before they get there. But I just have a burning, this one I'll say is a thesis. This is beyond a hypothesis at this point. There's so much data that if you aren't really pushing yourself to be obviously in shape, you're doing yourself real dirty, psychologically and physiologically.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know about 10%. I don't know if there's any data on what specific body fat you need
That's
to
just
be.
my.
I think, making a goal and having one is important, but getting into a healthy BMI, and that's sort of not the best indicator, right? Because when you have a lot of muscle mass, your BMI can be high and you can still be healthy. But generally speaking, I think most people the average person can use BMI as an indicator, and trying to be in a healthy BMI. It's variable for different races. So like Asians, for example, need to be a lower BMI to be healthier than Caucasians, for example.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, because we have higher risk factors. So this actually, and this is not my area of expertise, but I've watched videos on this, but apparently because in South Asian culture,
I was going to
for
say, when you say
example,
we, are you putting yourself in the Asian
South
bucket?
Asian more so than Asian, but I think Asian falls in the category. But with South Asians, we had famines for many years, generationally, back a few generations. And so that's apparently impacted our metabolic needs. And so we actually need to be at a lower BMI and a lower waist circumference than the average, the Caucasian numbers, which are what we share in the US, to be healthy.
I had no idea that was true.
Yeah.
That is really fascinating. Okay, so anybody listening along, they want to turn it all around. Obviously, we've given them some great lifestyle hacks and stuff, but let's say that they're still struggling with erectile dysfunction. Shockwave therapy is not approved in the US for that. I don't know if that means you can't get it.
You can still get it. You can pay out of pocket. I mean, we offer it too, but again, I tell everyone the data, I tell them the caveats, and it's like, yes, it may work. It may be beneficial. It's the only thing that, there's only a few things we have that can turn back the clock in terms of blood flow in the penis, and that's one of them.
What's your take on daily Cialis?
So I really like daily Cialis. In fact, I think it should be in the water. It is like so safe, and I think it works really well.
I'm paranoid about daily anything, but this is interesting.
Well, it works basically. I mean, all these PDE5 inhibitors work by inhibiting PDE5, which breaks down CAMP, which is let's take it backwards. So nitric oxide is the ignition for erections. It causes the release of CAMP, which creates the erection. PDE5 breaks it down. And so when you prevent PDE5, you're then allowing that erection to be sustained longer. And in some cases, get you the erection sooner or earlier. And so ultimately, that whole process means that you get better blood flow to the penis, right? And better blood flow means better, healthier tissues. And so our bodies, men's bodies typically take care of this by doing nighttime erections. So men will have 3 to 4 to 6 erections over the course of the night, and that's completely normal and physiologic and healthy. They'll often wake up with an erection. And again, that's all normal, healthy physiology. And so your body's constantly giving blood flow to the area, whether you want it to or not. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's actually a good thing. I actually get comments on my YouTube like, how can I stop this? And I'm like, no, this is a good thing. I think it's more like international. People are worried about like, is this bad or something?
Why?
I think it's more of like like they're worried culturally, like, is this bad? Like, why am I having erections? Like, I don't know. I don't really understand.
That is utterly fascinating.
But they really think
it's a moral thing?
Maybe. I can't speak to it, but they definitely get worried about nocturnal emissions. And that will happen. Almost every guy will have a wet dream at some point in their lives. And if you are holding off with you're sustaining from ejaculation for whatever reason, whether it's through, your body will take care of it. Either it will absorb the semen or you will ejaculate it at night.
Okay, I'm going to say something. I don't know if this is controversial. People are going to be like, yeah, exactly. Before I got married, having a wet dream was like the most amazing thing in the universe. You're literally having a dream where the dream is so erotic that without any stimulation, you have an orgasm? Like, yeah, if that didn't require a level of abstinence that I find wholly uninteresting, they're rad. It's messy. That's not fun. But man, I don't know, it might be worth the trade-off.
But there's a lot of shame. People feel a lot of shame, right? They wake up with sticky sheets and they feel shameful. Like some of them feel like maybe like that was bad. And like culturally, depending on how you grow up, that can be really looked upon as a negative. And, you know, a lot of the way you think about sex is all about how you're raised, right? How was sex talked about? Like, even when you're a little kid, every kid touches their genitals. Every single kid touches their genitals. They may even like try to stimulate themselves in front of you. They don't know they're kids, right? It
unexpected.
feels good. It's like whatever. And so, as a parent, a lot of people are like, don't do that. That's dirty, or that's shameful, or don't do that. And so that kid internalizes that's bad. I shouldn't touch myself. That's bad. And and usually most people will get over it, but there's some people who carry that with them, and they're like, oh, touching myself, masturbating, being sexual with myself is bad. And then having wet dreams, in the same vein, maybe their parent woke up and their sheets were dirty. Like, oh, this is disgusting, you know, and then they internalize that.
Man, that's so interesting. That never made my radar. So, not that people don't find shame around sex, obviously,
right,
but that people would be tripped out or ashamed of having a dream. You have dreams about the weirdest stuff in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a little sad that more of my dreams aren't about sex. That is a very entertaining way to spend a night. That's really surprising. Huh. Okay.
So back to the tadalafil.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think because it increases blood flow. For example, if you're getting erectile dysfunction, you may stop having those nighttime erections. And over the course of many, many years, if you're not getting as many erections, you're not getting as much blood flow or increasing the oxygen content of those tissues, and you can then have tissue changes and ultimately fibrosis and scarring and shortening of the penis. And so that's why I love it. If you're having any
Did you
issues,
say shortening of the penis?
Yes,
We're
I
going
did.
in the wrong
I did.
direction here.
So
Put it in the water.
So that's why I say, like, for men, I say tadalafil, and for women, I say vaginal estrogen. Like, everyone should have access to vaginal estrogen. It's super safe. It's super healthy and helps prevent UTIs and helps keep tissues healthy and all that stuff. So those are the two things I think should be in the water.
Don't skip over that. So vaginal estrogen, is
Correct.
it a suppository?
You can do a suppository, you can do a cream, or you can do a ring that is inserted by your doctor. And those emit vaginal hormones. So after menopause, the vulva goes through many changes. So the minora shrink, the vaginal tissues become thinner and more friable. And then you can have more discomfort with sex. You can have more UTIs because the pH of the vagina changes, because you no longer have estrogen converting converting into lactobacilli, causing a conversion into lactobacilli, which prevent UTIs and keeping the pH low. So then giving vaginal estrogen keeps the health of the tissues, and then prevents that thinning of the tissues that can make sex uncomfortable, that can make you generally uncomfortable. And a lot of women get recurrent UTIs after menopause, and vaginal estrogen fixes it.
Going back to Cialis, that was originally developed as a blood pressure medication?
So sildenafil, or Viagra, was originally developed as a blood pressure medication. And they did the study, they did this big randomized controlled trial, and they found out that people weren't returning the samples at the end of the trial. And they were like, what's going on? The guy's like, oh, I'm getting good erections with this. And so that's when they realized that this didn't work for blood pressure, but it worked great for erections. And so that's when sildenafil came along. And honestly, thank God it did, because we didn't have many options before sildenafil.
So does Cialis work on a totally different mechanism?
Same mechanism. It works on PDE6 instead of PDE5, but basically the same sort of mechanism.
So why is nobody saying daily Viagra? Why daily Cialis?
Because of the half-life. So tadalafil has a half-life of 36 hours, and tadalafil has a half-life of 4 to 8 hours.
So I'm always tense. So if something's giving me an erection, it's doing something to my blood flow. Surely it's systemic.
Mm-hmm.
Why would that be advantageous to me at a systemic level? I certainly understand if I have ED, but
Well, I think, if you don't have ED, you probably don't need it, right? But there is some data that it may have less. Again, these are like not great studies, but like there's some data that maybe it's also reducing cardiovascular risk because there is some blood flow improvement throughout other parts of your body. But ultimately, I think if you're having ED, it's very effective. One, it works, but again, there's caveats. All medications don't work on everyone. Success rate is probably 60 to 70% of medications. But in terms of why I think it's so great is like you remove that psychological barrier. Like, oh, I have to remember to take this pill an hour before I have sex, or it could be, a day before with tadalafil or whatever, but you still have to remember to take it. And then like, is it going to work? Is it going to work? I just took the pill. Is it going to work? I'm not sure. Like there's a lot of anxiety even around doing something right before sex that's new. And so I find that especially in younger patients, it just like takes that stress out of the picture. So sometimes in men who I can tell it's pretty much psychogenic, like young guys. But yes, you should see a sex therapist. You should see a psychologist to kind of work on your thoughts around sex. But in the meantime, try this, because once you get the confidence back that you can get an erection, you may not have the problem anymore because you're not going to come to the encounter being stressed, right? You're like, okay, I can have an erection. I'm good.
It's very interesting. What are the side effects of Cialis?
So side effects with both medications, any PDE5 inhibitor, you can have some nasal congestion, you can have flushing, sort of like a headache feeling. With sildenafil, what we worry about, if you have vision changes like blue-green vision discoloration, you got to stop that medication immediately. With tadalafil, sometimes people have muscle aches. The other thing that people forget is that with sildenafil or Viagra, you have to take it on an empty stomach. If you take it with a lot of food, it's not going to work and you'll still get the side effects. So it's not really great. Whereas tadalafil, you can eat if you like to have like evening sex and you want to have dinner before.
So I'm getting a headache, but that's anything that messes with my brain, I am so paranoid about. What is it doing that causes the headache? Is it increasing my blood pressure?
It's just that it's working on other PDE inhibitor, other variations of PDE5, and so that causes, I forget the exact mechanism, but that's why you get the side effects. Now, that's another reason I like the low dose of tadalafil, because the side effects are lower.
Got it. Okay. Very intriguing. All right. What are other lifestyle tips that you recommend? You've got guys coming in all the time. Sex therapists you just mentioned. What's like that package of goods that you give people that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone can benefit from sex therapy, because even if you have organic ED, you're stressed about it, you're anxious about it, and that's not going to help you get an erection. That's going to hinder it. So I think like being able to accept that issue and moving past it and not having that stress, even if it's like, yeah, I got bad diabetes, my hemoglobin A1C is 10. Like if you have the time and you have the means to see a therapist, it will help. It's not going to reverse your diabetes, but it will help your thoughts around sex. And then I think ultimately, in terms of other lifestyle things, I mean, fixing those issues. So if it's your blood pressure, if it's your cholesterol, if it's your diabetes, first and foremost, work on those. So if your hemoglobin A1C is high, bring it down. If your blood pressure is high, bring it down. Like whatever you need to do. The hard part with blood pressure is we want to bring it down. If we use pharmacologic medication to bring it down, some of the pharmacologic medications have side effects. And so that also cause ED. So you got to talk to your regular doctor and make sure you tell them, like, I want to make sure I don't have side effects of ED, because there are some that don't have those side effects. And then, the same things as testosterone, like exercise. Exercise, the biggest one I can say is continue exercising. And in this case, you want to do cardiovascular endurance exercises, at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise every week.
Okay. Getting the vascular system in place makes a lot of sense.
Oh, and quit smoking. So if you're smoking, you have to quit. Smoking will kill your erections. Let me say it again. Smoking will kill your erections.
I've heard that smoking also shortens your penis. Is that really true, or is that?
Well, again, it's the same thing. If you're not getting erections, you'll develop fibrosis and then it'll shrink. And it does change your tissue quality. So I think that's another component, is the carcinogens or the chemicals in smoke have some effect on tissue quality overall. That's why smokers don't heal as well after surgery.
Really? I had no idea. What about weed?
So weed is sort of complicated. Like in small doses, people will say it increases my desire. It's great, you know. But if you're using it more regularly, it's absolutely going to have a negative impact first on your sperm quality. So if you're trying to get pregnant, like don't smoke weed because it's going to mess up your semen quality. And then in terms of erectile function, it does have some effects in that realm, but more so in the desire realm. After you using it a lot, you're just not going to want to have sex.
Okay, so I am a super infrequent user of marijuana. However, in low doses, yeah, I'm a noob for sure. But so in low doses, infrequently, it makes sex unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's not even the same sport.
Yes.
I'm so conflicted saying this because I'm just a big fan of not doing a lot of drugs. I don't have a moral thing against it at all. Like if you want to drink, you want to smoke, do drugs, I literally, cool. No beef whatsoever. I worry about longevity. And so, but man, if I'm being honest, my wife really enjoys marijuana and she has convinced me to try it. And one time, oh man, I would go years between smoking because I just hated it. I hated the way it made me feel lethargic. And like the third time I smoked, I don't even remember why, but I rubbed my hands across my legs and I was like, whoa, that felt amazing. And so we took advantage of that. And I was like, this is unbelievable. So on the occasion,
we do see that. We do see that in small doses, people find their libido increases with marijuana. And so again, as long as it's not becoming a habit forming thing, you're not going to have negative long-term consequences. But you know, once in a while I think is fine.
but if you're doing it a lot, you could run into trouble.
Correct.
What about alcohol?
Again, same holds true. Now, we know that no amount of alcohol is really safe in terms of cancer prevention. So now,
Tell me more. That's come out?
Yep, there's no amount of alcohol that is safe because any amount will increase your risk of breast cancer and a few other cancers as well. So generally speaking, it's the whole like have a glass of wine for your heart. Not good enough to prevent cancer. So generally speaking, no amount of alcohol is safe for that. That being said, in terms of erections and sexual function, again, if you're doing it all the time, every day, and you may start noticing some unintended consequences in terms of desire, and erections, because whiskey dick is a real thing. Like people will have difficulty getting erections when they're too inebriated. And so that becomes an issue. But again, in small doses, we don't see an issue.
So speaking of whiskey dick, SSRI dick strikes me as a terrifying one. Is there data on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of data. So SSRIs we know cause low libido for sure. That's a very common cause, and erectile dysfunction, but it's dose dependent. So if you need SSRIs for antidepressant, one, you can switch to a different type of antidepressant that has less side effects. Wellbutrin is the one that I always tell my patients to talk to their psychiatrist or primary care doctor about. But even if, say, you're doing really well on like Zoloft or something else, you can go down on the dose, and if you're still getting benefit, you may see your erections come back and your desire come back. But it is a strong side effect of those medications.
Yeah, getting back into you just get into a horrible loop. I'll paint a picture for people, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, oh, whoa, that sounds a little bit too much like me. You start eating bad food. Tastes amazing. So you eat a lot of it, puts you in a way better mood. So you're loving it.
For the short time.
Yep. But you start putting on fat and you start feeling a little bit less great about yourself. Your penis starts getting a little bit, it seems
less
smaller,
visible, yeah.
less visible. You then are also starting to have weaker erections. You get in your own head both about not looking good, your penis looking smaller, being uncomfortable naked in front of somebody, getting paranoid that you're going to lose your erection because it is a little bit weaker and you do start losing it. You're no longer feeling powerful. That starts some darker thoughts, some unhappy thoughts. You don't have the, cognitive behavioral therapy training to pull yourself out of that. So then that begins to exacerbate itself. The thing that cheers you up is some more food, bit of pornography, that OnlyFans subscription that you have. And all of a sudden, the things that you're doing to pull yourself out of that are actually making it worse. You're smoking a ton of weed, you're drinking, and now you're in a real downward spiral. And all the things that give you the dopamine hits that you need to feel better, and they really do work and they really do make you feel better, but they have second and third order consequences that are actually making this worse. And now the downward spiral really speeds up. You finally seek help, which I am actually glad, despite me painting a picture that is something you can control. If you need help, man, get it. I don't care how self-inflicted the wound is. I don't want you feeling guilty about that. So you go get on the SSRI, and now that's lowering your libido even more, and now you're feeling even worse. Oh God. And now we're just in a really, really dark place. Speak up, seek help. But did that sound like a thing you see a lot?
Yeah, so it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So is it the depression that came first, or was it the sexual dysfunction that caused the depression that then got them on the SSRI that made the sexual dysfunction worse? So yeah, we don't always know what the issue is. And as I said, sexual dysfunction, sex is powerful in terms of how it affects your brain. It can be devastating. And so it is really, your story is like a lot of men's stories, a lot of people's story in general. Like this is something that people struggle with. And I think there's no easy way, but you got to sort of like, you got to do the hard work. Like you said, you got to seek help. And yes, sometimes you might need an SSRI for a short period of time, but that may help you get back in the mood so you can actually feel energetic and excited to do things again. And then you can start doing things and improving your life and your quality of life and exercising and eating right again and sort of getting yourself back on track. Or you may find other things that help you do that are not medication. But ultimately, like, yes, seeking help is the key sooner the better, right? Because as you can see, the downward spiral you painted there can start pretty small and it can get really, 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 really deep. And so trying to like get help when you notice yourself struggling, that takes a lot of insight and a lot of courage, but it's really important.
Rena, this has been a joy. Where can people follow you?
So I'm on Rena Malik MD on all the platforms. You can follow me on YouTube. My channel is Rena Malik MD, and I also have a podcast, Rena Malik MD Podcast. Everything's really consistent. And if you want to see me as a patient, I practice in Newport Beach, California, and Beverly Hills, and I'm also licensed in 8 states, so I can see you virtually.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Guys, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more.
Then what you realize is your capacity to tap into dopamine as a motivator, not just seeking dopamine rewards, that is infinite. And I can say with great certainty that this is how you were able to build a big company and sell it, how you've been able to build a successful podcast and so